Chapter 298. Although he no longer had any expectations for this award, Eric's expression was still a little uneasy. However, at the same time, he comforted himself like a cue in his heart. Anyway, he was still young. It was not a good thing to win an award too early. On the stage, after Jane Fonda introduced the nominees for Best Original Screenplay, she looked around the audience. Intentionally or unintentionally, Eric found that the woman's eyes lingered on him for a moment. But before Eric could make any confirmation, Jane Fonda lowered her head and opened the envelope. She took out the card with the winner's name written on it and looked at it. A surprised expression flashed across her face. Then, she smiled and looked up at Eric again. Eric was sure that this time it was definitely not his imagination. If the look just now could have been inadvertent, then, this time, did it mean? His heart beat rapidly a few times. Eric unconsciously clenched his fists again and stared at Jane Fonda with bright eyes. Jane Fonda seemed to feel the urging of everyone below the stage. She did not keep them in suspense anymore. She leaned close to Mike and said loudly, "The winner of the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay is Island Horror." The most impossible thing happened. Most of the people in the Los Angeles Music Hall were people who had been immersed in Hollywood for a long time. When they heard the name, many of them also showed a surprised expression. Although he had been hinted in advance, Eric still stared in disbelief. It was not until people around him stood up that Eric stood up. Thunderous applause soon followed. At the same time, a scene that surprised everyone in the awards hall also happened. As Eric stood up, more people followed, including Island Horror, Sleepless in Seattle, Dark War, Pretty Woman, and other Firefly-related crews that had a series of nominations. The number of people who stood up involved the people in the 5 rows around Eric. Although many people who stood up immediately realized that it was inappropriate, it was even more inappropriate to sit down, so they could only stay where they were. Eric hugged a few people nearby. Due to the pressure of time, he could only shake hands with the people around him. Some of them were too far away and could only touch fingers. Even so, it took nearly a minute for Eric to walk onto the stage. Below the stage, many people's serious doubts, shock, and helplessness had turned into envy. If a small Best Original Screenplay award could cause such a stir, after today, no one would dare to underestimate Eric's status in Hollywood. Eric had prepared the acceptance speech for this award beforehand, so it was easier than when he had won the Best Original Score award an hour ago. While Eric was giving his acceptance speech, he was also thinking about why he had won the award. Without a doubt, this was the result of Oscar dividing the pork. Eric felt that he had underestimated the Oscars. With his current influence in Hollywood, if he had won nothing after being nominated for 2 awards, then the fairness of the Oscars would be questioned again. Moreover, this time, the doubts would definitely not only come from the media, but also from the general public. As for the reason, it was because of the incident some time ago. Eric had already experienced a wave of malicious suppression. If the Oscars still let him go home empty-handed after he had been nominated for 2 awards, then the public would inevitably have some negative associations and be disappointed in the Oscars. As for why he didn't win the Best Adapted Screenplay award for Smelling Women, which was more likely to win, but the Best Original Screenplay award for Scary Island, Eric understood that it was likely the result of a series of games behind the scenes. Although he was very interested in the series of inside stories, Eric knew that he had not yet reached the level where he could touch on the internal games of the Oscars. With this in mind, he followed Jane Fonda and the presenter backstage. The staff attentively came up to take the little golden man that did not have a nameplate in Eric's hand and pinned the golden nameplate on for him. Next was the award for Best Director, and Smelling Women was also nominated for Best Director. Therefore, Eric, who was waiting for the staff to pin the nameplate, was inevitably a little anxious. At this time, Jane Fonda, who was presenting the award for him, came over. "Mr. Williams, congratulations." Jane Fonda smiled and reached out to Eric. "Ms. Fonda, thank you for the tip just now." Although he was anxious, Eric still maintained his good interests and flattered her. "I've seen many of your movies. Return with Honor and Murder in Red Street are both very good, but my favorite is still Golden Pond. The kinship shown in this movie is very touching. Thank you for liking it." Jane Fonda maintained her smile and continued, "Mr. Williams, you are definitely going to have a celebration party next, right?" Eric's expression changed slightly, and he quickly realized that this woman did not simply come over to say hello to him. Although he did not know the other party's purpose, it was definitely beneficial for him to establish some friendship with a famous Hollywood acting family. Therefore, Eric said without hesitation, "Yes, Ms. Fonda. If you are free, you are welcome to our celebration party after the ceremony. The venue is on the 3rd floor of the Beverly Hills Hotel." "I will be there." Jane Fonda nodded. She knew that Eric was also in a hurry to return to the hall, so she did not say too much and quickly left. Even so, when Eric returned to the awards hall, he was disappointed to find that the director of Born on the 4th of July, Oliver Stone, was giving his acceptance speech on stage. Al Pacino, who was nearby, saw Eric coming back and gave him a helpless look. As for Martin Brest, Eric did not see his expression, but other than disappointment, Eric could not think of anything else. Speaking of the movie Born on the 4th of July, it had to be mentioned about the sad Tom Cruise. After watching this movie, Eric remembered that Tom Cruise would have been nominated for his first Best Actor Oscar with this movie. Unfortunately, because of his role in Dark War, Cruise missed out on this movie. Originally, Firefly and Cruise had tried to get a nomination for Best Actor, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Although Tom Cruise was nominated for Best Actor in a drama series at the Golden Globe Awards for his role in Dark War, he did not get an Oscar nomination. Therefore, when Eric saw Cruise a few days ago, the other party did not give him a good look. Cruise had already received enough remuneration for his role in Dark Warfare. Therefore, even though Eric felt a little helpless about Cruise not being nominated for an Oscar, he didn't feel like he owed him anything. After all, Cruise's remuneration was much higher than Hank's. With that thought in mind, the previous Best Actress winner, Jodie Foster, began to introduce the nominees for Best Actor. Listening to the introduction of the girl on the stage, Eric suddenly thought that if The Silence of the Lambs had been produced and released last year, Jodie Foster would have likely won the Academy Award for Best Actress. This was a pity. The nominees for Best Actor are Morgan Freeman, Driving for Miss Daisy, Al Pacino, Smell a Woman, Daniel Day-Lewis, My Left Foot, Kenneth Branagh, Henry V, God of War, and Robin Williams, Dead Poets Society. Every time a person was introduced, a wonderful film clip would appear on the big screen behind Jodie Foster. Eric looked at Al Pacino, whose waist was slightly tense not far away. He could understand Al Pacino's feelings. Since 17 years ago, Al Pacino had been nominated for 5 Oscars, but all of them failed. With Al Pacino's acting skills, it was not an exaggeration to say that the Oscars owed him an Oscar. As for the original Best Actor Oscar winner, Daniel Day-Lewis, although his acting skills were also very good, Daniel Day-Lewis's disadvantage was also very obvious. First of all, he was British, which would definitely be discriminated against by the Oscars. Secondly, Daniel Day-Lewis was only in his early 30s, which had just reached the average age of an Oscar. Compared to Al Pacino, who was already in his 50s, he looked even younger. In the end, it was impossible for Daniel Day-Lewis to compete with Al Pacino, who had been in Hollywood for almost 20 years, in terms of qualifications and connections. In his previous life, the reason why Daniel Day-Lewis was able to win the award had a lot to do with the fact that it happened to be the Oscar year. Although he was affected by the butterfly effect, Eric could still associate some clues from the current list. Most of the nominated movies should be the same as in his previous life. However, among these nominated movies, except for Born on the 4th of July, which originally had some fame because of Tom Cruise, the other movies didn't have much influence. This time, things were not out of Eric's expectations. After Jodie Foster opened the envelope, she quickly read out Al Pacino's name. In the warm applause, Al Pacino greeted the crew of Knowing a Woman by scent. He did not immediately go on stage. Instead, he walked towards Eric in the back row. Eric realized what he was going to do and stood up with a smile. Jonathan Demme, who was sitting on the other side of Eric, sensibly moved aside. Chapter 299. Al Pacino gave Eric a big hug and said, "Eric, thank you." Eric took a deep breath as he was hugged by Al Pacino. He smiled and said, "Al, you deserve it. Even without me, I believe that with your ability, you would have won the Oscar for Best Actor sooner or later." Patting Eric on the back, Al Pacino didn't say anything else. He looked at Eric gratefully and walked to the stage. Eric returned to his seat and saw Al Pacino walk to the stage. When he walked up the stairs, he staggered and almost fell, but no one in the hall laughed. Instead, the applause became louder. Taking the Golden Man from Jodie Foster, Al Pacino walked to the microphone. Although there was still a glimmer in his eyes, his gaze became sharp again. Looking at the audience below the stage, Al Pacino said generously after a moment, "I have been waiting for this day for 17 years. Although he was very excited, Al Pacino didn't say too much. A minute later, Al Pacino followed Jodie Foster backstage. Then, Michelle Pfeiffer, who was nominated for the Best Actress Oscar, walked to the stage. After a speech, the nominated song, "Flying Over the Rainbow," was performed live. A few minutes later, Al Pacino returned to the audience. The last and most important award of this year's Oscars was coming. Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson walked to the stage together. After a short gag, they began to introduce the list of films nominated for Best Picture. As the award ceremony had lasted for several hours, the films nominated for Best Picture had already been introduced in detail, so the introductions were very brief this time. The 5 winning films appeared on the big screen one after another. Warren Beatty opened the envelope and quickly read out the name of Driving for Miss Daisy. After failing to be nominated for Best Director, Eric no longer had much hope of being nominated for Best Picture. Now that he heard the name Driving for Miss Daisy, he felt more balanced than anyone else. After all, this movie had won Best Picture in his previous life. Now that it had won Best Picture again, Eric wasn't too disappointed. This result was actually not bad. Although because of Eric's appearance, there were many movies that did not originally appear at the Oscars this year. If one were to think about it carefully, this year was still a small Oscar year. Knowing a Woman by Smelling Fragrance was undoubtedly excellent, but this excellence was mainly reflected in Al Pacino's acting skills. As far as the movie was concerned, it was far from the sensational effect of movies such as Schindler's List, Forrest Gump, and Titanic in the history of the Oscars. Therefore, this year's Oscars did not have a single movie that could win all the major awards. The Academy also divided the 4 major awards among several different movies. Firefly was already very lucky to be able to get a nomination for Best Actor. With the final award, the 62nd Academy Awards officially came to an end. Some people were happy, while others were disappointed. As he walked out, Eric saw the most disappointed people this year: the Wayne Stan brothers of Mira Mike and the crew of My Left Foot. Although My Left Foot had received 5 nominations, it did not win a single award. Moreover, it seemed that it had been sniped by Firefly. For example, Daniel Day-Lewis, who was supposed to win Best Actor, was taken away by Al Pacino. Julia also won Best Supporting Actress. As for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, and Best Picture, although it had nothing to do with Firefly, My Left Foot also did not win any awards. Eric and the Wayne Stan brothers had met once when they tried to buy Mira Mike. Their offer did not satisfy Eric. In the end, the deal did not succeed, so Eric mainly focused on the new line. At this time, seeing Eric again after more than half a year, the Harvey Wayne Stan and Bob Stan brothers only hesitated for a moment before they walked up to Eric, who was in the crowd surrounded by Firefly. Eric smiled and shook hands with them. At the same time, he also noticed Daniel Day-Lewis' unconvinced gaze when he looked at the little golden man in Al Pacino's hand. He just smiled. "Mr. Williams, congratulations." Harvey Wayne Stan did not look disappointed at all. He discreetly pushed away Jonathan Demme, who was originally next to Eric, with a flattering smile on his face. "Mr. Williams, it's a pity that we didn't succeed in our cooperation back then. I think maybe we can find some time to talk again?" Eric raised his eyebrows slightly. Now that Firefly and the new line had been integrated, although Firefly would not be underestimated, its overall strength was still not comparable to the 7 major film companies. Therefore, if he were to buy the Wayne Stan brothers' Mira Mike, he did not know where to place the Wayne Stan brothers. Moreover, Robert Shaye's operation of the Oscars this time also proved that Firefly's public relations ability for the Oscars was not much worse than the Weinstein brothers. In fact, it was even better than the other party. In addition, with Eric around, in terms of the selection of films for the Oscars, his vision was not much worse than the Weinstein brothers. Therefore, Eric was no longer as eager to buy Mira Mike as he had thought. However, the ability of the two brothers in front of him was there after all. Although he was no longer eager to buy Mira Mike, Eric did not intend to push the other party to other film companies. In that case, let's make an appointment to talk about it. Eric nodded to Harvey Weinstein. Just as he was about to say something, Eric saw a group of people from another crew passing by. Although he did not know the others, Eric was very familiar with one of the women. She was Isabel Akani. The woman seemed to have noticed Eric's gaze. She looked at Eric for a moment and then looked away without any intention of greeting him. Eric didn't mind. Instead, he turned his head and looked around. Among the crew of My Left Foot, who was following behind the Harvey Weinstein brothers, Daniel Day-Lewis was completely indifferent when Isabella Johnny passed by. Clearly, the two of them weren't familiar with each other, let alone passionately in love. Eric stretched his fingers and thought so. It's really interesting. Chapter 300. The spacious party hall was crowded with people. This was the Oscar celebration party that Firefly was holding. Under normal circumstances, except for those award-winning film crews, usually only the 7 major Hollywood film companies would hold similar parties after the Golden Globe Awards or the Oscars and invite a group of Hollywood stars to participate. Second- and third-tier film companies would not do this at all. This was not a matter of money, but a reflection of a company's strength. This was because when second- and third-tier film companies held similar parties, they would encounter the awkward situation of not having any heavyweight stars to support them. That would be even more embarrassing. But Firefly was different. Although Firefly was still in the position of a second-tier film company, Firefly had a great impact on the awards and box office this year. In addition to most of the original UTA stars, there were also many other Hollywood stars who came to support or look for opportunities. I feel that the Academy is still too conservative. This year, the 4 movies that you personally directed have all been successful in the box office. Other than Home Alone 2, which is a pure comedy, I feel that the other 3 movies won't have a problem getting a nomination for Best Director, especially Dark War. It's such a pity. Harvey Weinstein's chubby face moved closer to Eric's side and said sincerely. Eric happened to meet the Weinstein brothers after the Oscar ceremony. He originally wanted to find a chance to chat, but when the Weinstein brothers heard that Firefly was holding a celebration party, they directly brought the entire crew of My Left Foot over. Although My Left Foot received 5 nominations, they came back empty-handed in the end. The Weinstein brothers canceled the original celebration party, and the crew of My Left Foot did not complain. Eric smiled with a red wine in his hand. Harvey, this is nothing. I'm still so young, and there will be many opportunities in the future. It's not a good thing to win an award too early. It's easy to lose one's direction and become stagnant. No. Harvey Weinstein immediately shook his head and said, Eric, actually, I think there are many mistakes in Firefly's strategy to win awards. Just like the 2 best screenplay nominations you received. If I were in your shoes, I definitely wouldn't have applied for Best Original Screenplay and Best Adapted Screenplay separately. It's not that your screenplay is not good enough, but that the 2 screenplays are good enough. This will cause both nominations to fail. As for the reason, I think you can definitely guess it now. There's also Knowing Women by Smelling Fragrance. It's a pity that he only won the Best Actor award. I think Mr. Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in My Left Foot was also very good. If it wasn't for Scent Knows Women, perhaps the Best Actor award would have been his. Eric looked at Daniel Day-Lewis, who was not far away, and continued, I heard that when Daniel was acting, he was so immersed in his role that he couldn't extricate himself. He even really treated himself as a disabled person and often needed help to eat. Harvey Weinstein looked around, then slightly lowered his voice and said, Actually, I originally wanted to PR for Best Actor. Although My Left Foot was good enough. It was a British film after all. The main character in the film was also an Irish artist. Therefore, although My Left Foot was nominated for 5 awards, it was most likely to only be Best Actor. However, after Scent Knows Women appeared, I knew that Daniel's Best Actress award was definitely out of the question. The possibility of Best Picture was even lower, so I changed it to Best Director. Unfortunately, I still couldn't win against Oliver Stone in the end. After all, Oliver is a famous director in Hollywood for many years, and it was Jim Sheridan's first time directing a film. In the end, it was Mira Mike's bad luck this time. Eric nodded non-committally and continued to wait for Harvey to continue. He knew that Harvey definitely didn't lay out so much just to reveal a little inside information to him. Sure enough, after a short pause, Harvey Weinstein pointed at Robert Shea, who was excitedly discussing something with a few people nearby, and said, "Eric, I know that Mr. Robert Shea was the one who led Firefly's Oscar Public Relations, but you also saw that Scent Knows Women is such an excellent film. Moreover, compared to My Left Foot, Scent Knows Women embodies typical American values. The director, Martin Brest, is also very experienced. With all these advantages, in the end, he only won the Best Actor award. Both Best Director and Best Picture missed out. That's really a pity. If Scent Knows Women was directed by Mira Mike, I believe that at least one of the Best Director and Best Picture awards could have been won." After hearing Harvey Weinstein's words, Eric said with some regret, "Harvey, what you said does make a lot of sense. However, there's no place for Mira Mike in Firefly now. When I was planning to expand Firefly, I did some research on Mira Mike. I know that you two brothers buy films in Europe or the Far East all year round and then bring them back for distribution in China. Then, you must have a lot of foundation and connections abroad. My original plan was to let Robert Shea be in charge of distribution in North America and leave the expansion of overseas channels to you two brothers." When Harvey Weinstein heard Eric's words, he couldn't help but stick out his tongue and lick his wet lips. The expansion of Firefly's overseas channels was a very big cake. It must be known that the first few films that Eric personally directed had similar box office results overseas and domestic box office results. Even Pretty Woman's box office overseas was $100 million higher than the domestic box office. The reason why the Weinstein brothers mainly focused on selecting indie films to compete for the Oscars was that they were not capable enough. Gaining fame through winning awards and then earning box office and peripheral profits was also an unconventional method. After all, Hollywood only had one Oscars every year. If there was a chance to release a commercial film that sold well, the Weinstein brothers would definitely change their route without hesitation. Then, "Eric, I think now." Eric shook his head. "It's too late now, Harvey. Firefly and New Line have now been integrated. Although I'm still the biggest shareholder of Firefly, I have to consider Robert's feelings. Compared to the current Firefly, Mira Mike's power is too weak. If we go according to the original plan, Robert will definitely not be willing to let you two brothers share the power of overseas distribution." After a trace of disappointment flashed across Harvey Weinstein's face, he quickly said, "Eric, actually, I'm better at PR awards. Maybe we can." "Harvey, why do you think so many people are so enthusiastic about the Oscars?" Harvey Weinstein paused for a moment and said, "Benefits." Eric smiled and said, "You see, that's right. That's why, although any large film company values the Oscars very much, none of them put the Oscars in the first place. Most of the movies they produce are commercial films. The same goes for Firefly. Moreover, in the next few years, Firefly's main focus will be on commercial films. When it has developed to a certain level of strength and scale, it will step into the field of indie films and gain some glory for the company." "Eric, don't you think that these two things can go hand in hand?" Harvey said unwillingly. "Of course it can. So, there is still a high possibility of cooperation between us. But a merger is impossible. By the way, there's a film that I'm very optimistic about. The film's producer is also here today. Do you want me to introduce him to you?" Harvey Weinstein nodded disappointedly. Eric brought Harvey to find Elizabeth and Julia quickly. The two girls were sitting on a sofa in the corner and whispering to each other. "Hey, two beauties, can I sit down? Eric asked. Hearing Eric's voice, Julia's body suddenly stiffened. Elizabeth raised her leg and kicked at Eric. Go away, playboy. Eric quickly dodged to the side. Looking at the sharp black heels, he wiped the cold sweat in his heart. At the same time, he suddenly realized that the two women in front of him seemed to have kicked his leg, and it was the same leg. Birds of a feather flock together. Liz, don't be like this. I've already apologized. Here, let me introduce you to someone. Hearing Eric's words, Elizabeth stood up reluctantly. Julia also stood up. Her eyes swayed a few times before focusing on Eric's face and forcing a smile. Elizabeth looked at the fat man beside Eric. You mean him? Harvey Wayne Stan. I know him. Harvey looked at Eric in confusion. Now in Hollywood, there were probably not many women who dared to kick Eric without hesitation. Therefore, he had a strong curiosity about Elizabeth's identity. Eric quickly said, Harvey, this is Elizabeth Murdoch, Mr. Rupert Murdoch's second daughter. Ah, Miss Murdoch, hello. I didn't expect you to know me. It's such an honor. Harvey Wayne Stan immediately reached out his chubby hand with a smile. Elizabeth shook hands with Harvey reluctantly, then turned her gaze to Eric. What's the matter? It's like this. I think that after The Silence of the Lambs is produced, it will definitely do well at next year's Oscars. Harvey is very good at public relations in this area, so I wanted to introduce you to each other. Oh. Elizabeth let out a long sigh, and her expression became slightly angry. So, after Firefly finished the distribution and made money, they didn't care about the awards anymore? Eric waved his hand. Of course not, Liz. You must have misunderstood. I mean, Harvey is very good at public relations, so I want to hand over the public relations for next year's The Silence of the Lambs awards to them. Don't worry, all the public relations fees will be paid by Firefly. Elizabeth heard Eric say this and snorted coldly. She raised her chin and said, That's more like it. After the girl finished speaking, she turned her gaze to Harvey Wayne Stan with a questioning look. Harvey Weinstein was more than happy to have a relationship with the little princess of News Corporation. Although he only heard a few words, Harvey was keenly aware that Elizabeth was now working as a producer. This was a good opportunity. If he could establish a relationship with Miramax, with the financial resources of the Murdoch family, would Miramax still have to continue to make trouble? Thinking of this, the expression on Harvey's face became even more attentive. Every wrinkle on his chubby face was smiling as he said, I don't have any problems here either, Miss Murdoch. It's an honor to work with you. After the matter was settled, Elizabeth waved her hand at Eric and Harvey. Then, if there's nothing else, you can leave. The two men suddenly looked at each other. Harvey thought in his heart that they hadn't exchanged contact information or anything. Eric recalled the scene in the palace drama in his previous life where the concubines asked the young eunuchs to kneel down. Elizabeth was just about to pull Julia to sit down again when she suddenly thought of something. She said to Eric, You stay, I have something to ask you. Seeing this situation, Harvey could only tactfully leave for the time being. After Harvey left, Elizabeth asked, Mr. Williams, I heard that Ghost has been launched. The corner of Eric's mouth twitched. He nodded cooperatively and said, Yes, Miss Murdoch, do you have any orders? Before Elizabeth said anything, Julia was already amused by the tone of the two people and burst out laughing. The atmosphere was ruined. Elizabeth immediately pretended to be angry and pinched Julia's ribs. She didn't stop until Julia giggled and begged for mercy. Eric looked at the two women's playful appearance and laughed. Hey, I say, this is a public place. You should pay attention to your image. It's none of your business, you bastard. Okay, I don't care. Your Majesty, if you have something to say, please go ahead. Eric smiled bitterly and raised his hands in surrender. I can't help it, I won't lower myself to your level. I mean, the female lead in your next movie. What do you think of Julia? Eric looked at Julia and hesitated. He was about to speak when Elizabeth raised her eyebrows. You're not allowed to disagree. This role is decided. Liz, don't be like this, and I don't want to be with. Julia reacted and quickly pulled Elizabeth back. Elizabeth patted Julia's thigh comfortingly and said, "Don't worry, I will be by your side during the filming. I won't give some despicable guy any more chances." Chapter 301. Eric spread his hands helplessly. But Julia is really not suitable. Upon hearing Eric's words, a look of disappointment flashed in Julia's eyes even though she wasn't too willing. Meanwhile, Elizabeth asked, "Then tell me, what's inappropriate about it?" Julia doesn't fit the image of the female lead at all. In my imagination, the female lead should have short hair. Elizabeth said unhappily, "It's just hair. Just cut it." It's not like Julia didn't cut her hair when she was filming Steel Magnolias last year. You're completely twisting my logic. Okay. Actually, the image of the character in my imagination should be like this. Eric looked, then reached out to dip his finger into the red wine in the glass. He quickly drew on the coffee table in front of the three of them. Soon, the image of Molly that Demi Moore had created in his memory appeared on the glass table. The two girls watched curiously as Eric quickly drew. When Eric finished, Elizabeth stared at him for a while, then raised her head angrily. "I get it. It's just that her mouth is a little small. You're complaining that Julia's mouth is too big now. When you did that, why didn't you complain that Julia's mouth was too big? You bastard." Eric said bitterly, "Liz, can we be more serious?" Julia also pulled Elizabeth at this time. "Okay, Liz. Even if he wants me to act, I won't act." Elizabeth was about to say something when another woman's voice suddenly sounded beside the three of them. "Mr. Williams, so you're here." Elizabeth and Julia first looked behind Eric, then opened their mouths at the same time and let out a soft sound of surprise. Eric looked behind him, and his eyes widened. The person who spoke was Jane Fonda, who had given him an award on the Oscar stage not long ago. However, this was not the key to the matter. The key was the young woman holding Jane Fonda's arm. Jane Fonda saw that the three of them were looking at her niece in surprise. She quickly followed Julia's gaze and looked at the coffee table in front of the three of them. Then, she also looked puzzled. "Mr. Williams, I didn't expect your painting skills to be so good. It's just a few simple strokes, but they look so vivid." Eric smiled awkwardly, then stood up and looked at the girl beside Jane Fonda. He asked knowingly, "Miss Fonda, this is..." "Humph, what a hypocrite. You've already drawn her, yet you're still asking who she is." Elizabeth pouted and sneered. She then pulled Julia and left. Although Jane Fonda knew Julia, she didn't know Elizabeth, so she didn't mind when the two girls left. Instead, she said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, this is my niece, Bridget Fonda. She's my brother's daughter." "Nice to meet you, Miss Fonda." Eric reached out and shook Bridget Fonda's hand. Bridget Fonda also noticed the almost dried head on the coffee table at this time. She had just cut her hair short because of filming some time ago, so her current appearance was almost 80% similar to the woman on the coffee table. Although she didn't know why Eric drew this picture, Bridget Fonda still felt that perhaps her goal would be much smoother today. Eric knew that Jane Fonda had started to contact him backstage at the Oscars. She must have something to say. Interluding the picture on the coffee table, Eric pointed to the seats where Elizabeth and Julia were originally sitting and said, "Both of you, please take a seat." The aunt and niece thanked him and walked to the sofa together. Eric looked at the two women in front of him. In his memory, it seemed that Jane Fonda should have fallen out with her brother, Peter Fonda. However, looking at the two women, perhaps the conflict of the previous generation didn't affect this generation. Speaking of which, although the Fonda family's power in Hollywood couldn't be compared to the Coppola family, it still couldn't be underestimated. This kind of power could be seen from Bridget Fonda, who was sitting next to Jane Fonda. This girl with mediocre acting skills had debuted in the late 1980s and acted in movies for more than 10 years. She had been neither popular nor had any achievements in awards or box office. Even until she had to retire from acting due to a car accident, Bridget Fonda had acted in dozens of movies, most of which were female leads, but she didn't have a single masterpiece. This kind of situation was simply unimaginable for other actresses with no background in Hollywood. If ordinary actresses had no background and no connections, they would have been abandoned by Hollywood producers if they didn't have any response after acting in a few movies. "Mr. Williams, may I ask why you drew that head just now?" After the two women sat down, Bridget Fonda couldn't help but speak first. Eric hesitated for a moment before giving her an ambiguous explanation. "I was just explaining something to Miss Julia and drew it in passing. I didn't expect it to be so similar to Miss Fonda." Jane Fonda didn't give Eric a chance to play dumb. She asked with a smile, "Mr. Williams, that should be the look of one of the female leads in your movie, right?" Eric coughed dryly before saying, "Sort of. Don't tell me it's the movie Ghost that you're about to start filming?" Jane Fonda asked again. Sooner or later, the movie would be produced for the audience. Eric couldn't change the character's image just to tell such a small lie, so he nodded again. The aunt and niece looked at each other. Jane Fonda then said, "It's like this, Mr. Williams. Since it's such a coincidence, I was wondering if you could give Bridget a chance to audition?" Eric was a little hesitant. Since Jane Fonda had spoken, she definitely wasn't referring to the first few rounds of auditions, but the final audition for the role. Although Demi Moore, who played Molly in the original Ghost, had always been criticized for her acting skills, in that movie, Demi Moore had a rare outburst of acting skills. As a result, she was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. Moreover, when Demi Moore took on the role of Ghost, she had acted in movies for many years and had some experience. However, the girl in front of him was a newcomer who had only debuted 2 years ago. Her later movies also proved that she didn't have much potential in acting. Bridget Fonda saw the hesitation in Eric's expression and looked at her aunt for help. Jane Fonda gave her niece a reassuring look and said, "Mr. Williams, although this request is indeed a little abrupt, you just need to give Bridget a chance to audition. Bridget's father and I will definitely remember your kindness." Hearing that, Eric quickly nodded. Although this favor would be greatly reduced if Bridget Fonda didn't get the role in the end, it was still a favor, and it might come in handy in the future. "All right then, Ms. Fonda. However, I can only give Miss Fonda a chance to audition. As for the outcome, I can't give any guarantees." "Of course." Jane Fonda nodded and looked at her niece beside her. She stood up and said, "Mr. Williams, I'll take my leave first. Bridget likes your movies very much. Perhaps you can have a chat." Eric also stood up and watched Jane Fonda leave before sitting down again. He and Bridget Fonda looked at each other a few times. The two of them were like a blind couple meeting for the first time. They were so embarrassed that they didn't know what to say. In the end, it was Eric who spoke first. "Miss Fonda, actually, I've seen your movie." "Which one is it?" Bridget Fonda asked. "Magnificent Aria," Eric said and pointed to the corner of his mouth. Bridget Fonda pursed her lips and said, "At that time, I had a pimple on the corner of my mouth, so I didn't look very good on camera." "I think it's still very good," Eric teased without leaving a trace. Most of the scenes in Magnificent Aria were nude scenes. Back then, Eric had also watched those scenes, so Bridget Fonda was no exception. Eric also couldn't understand why this girl would accept such a movie in the first place. Perhaps she was fearless. After all, with her family backing her, she didn't have to be careful about her image like other actresses. Upon hearing Eric's words, Bridget Fonda's face turned slightly red. As it was their first time meeting, the two of them didn't talk much. After chatting for a while, Eric said, "Miss Fonda, I've been sitting here for quite a while. With so many people here, I have to socialize." "Well, please help yourself, Mr. Williams. Also, you can call me Bridget." "No problem." Eric nodded with a smile and got up to walk elsewhere. After the Oscars, the newspapers made their usual comments about the Oscars. Most people felt that this year's Oscars had divided the pork a little too much. At the same time, many people complained that Eric had missed the Best Adapted Screenplay award for Knowing a Woman by Scent. Under such circumstances, Driving for Miss Daisy which had taken the Best Adapted Screenplay award from Knowing a Woman by Scent, became the target of attack. Driving for Miss Daisy was a film released by Warner Pictures. Warner was currently the strongest of the 7 major Hollywood film companies. Therefore, after Driving for Miss Daisy caused controversy, Warner's counterattack came quickly. This incident caused a small stir in the newspapers and even overshadowed the limelight of several major awards. Chapter 302. As for the controversy over the award, the Academy did not respond as usual. Everyone knew that no matter who the award was given to, it would always cause controversy. A few days after the Oscars, Firefly's first movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, was released after the turmoil at the beginning of the year. Many people were paying attention to the movie with all kinds of emotions. Although Drowning Dog had also achieved good box office results some time ago, that movie's box office was much larger due to Eric's influence. However, it was still considered small. Because Eric was very optimistic about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robert Shea had collected as many as 2,000 screens for the movie. This was already the limit of Firefly's ability. If necessary, the 7 major film companies could collect more than 3,000 screens. Moreover, even if the box office of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was much better than the original plan after its release, it would be difficult to increase the number of screens. If the box office was not satisfactory, then hundreds of screens could be removed next week. Therefore, this release attracted the attention of most people in and out of the Hollywood circle. If Firefly encountered a failure this time, there would be a lot of people who would gloat or even kick them when they were down. However, because the box office results in his previous life were guaranteed, and the scale of the promotion was much larger than in his previous life, Firefly had invested more than $6 million in the promotion budget for the movie. This did not include the production cost of 2,000 copies. Therefore, Eric was not as nervous as Robert Shea or Jeffrey. Although he attended the premiere, Eric hid in the side as a guest this time. He gave the opportunity to show his face to the creators of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. At this time, he was discussing the preparations for Basic Instinct with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, if you can't find a suitable actor in Hollywood, I suggest you go to Europe to try. Just like the movie Prague Love a few years ago, the director of that movie chose European actors because most of the Hollywood actors were too conservative and unwilling to act in them. Jeffrey looked at Robert Shea, who was passionately speaking on stage. He shook his head and said, "Eric, I'm not worried about this. There are many other things. For example, the director, Paul Van Hoven, who you recommended, recently accepted a big production starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. He doesn't want to pay any attention to Basic Instinct at all. Moreover, the budget is also a very big problem. I asked someone to do a detailed budget according to the script you gave, and the final result is that the cost of this movie is at least $30 million, which is far more than the $20 million budget you gave. Most importantly, there's the issue of rating. The few scenes you designed are really too much. It's very easy for it to be rated NC-17. We don't have the ability to interfere with the rating committee right now. Once it's rated NC-17 and scheduled for screening in restricted theaters, then this movie will definitely lose everything." Eric scratched his head in distress. He knew that Jeffrey was telling the truth. The American Film Rating Committee was completely controlled by the 7 major film companies. Many people had analyzed that some movies with exactly the same scenes would be rated R if they were produced by the 7 major film companies, but those that weren't produced by the 7 major film companies would be rated NC-17. Eric clearly remembered that in his previous life, Meg Ryan had starred in naked mutilation in order to find a breakthrough. Because it was released by a major film company, some of the scenes in that movie could be rated as IV, but it was rated R instead. If this movie was not rated NC-17 in the future, then the 7 major film companies must have collectively gone crazy. Although there was still the possibility of re-rating by modifying the plot, in that case, there would definitely be a lot of changes in the plot, and the box office results would be difficult to predict. After thinking for a while, Eric knew that he had no other choice. He could only say, "How about this, Jeffrey? Contact the 7 major film companies and see which one is willing to cooperate. Choose one that is more beneficial to us. Then about you being the screenwriter. In that case, there's no way to hide it. Just use my real name. Anyway, I'm not even 20 years old now. Writing such a script would just make people think that I'm young and frivolous. If I hide it, I bet that no matter what the purpose of those guys is, they will definitely do everything possible to reveal it. Jeffrey shook his head helplessly. Eric, I really don't understand why you have to make such a movie. I don't see how this movie is outstanding. Then just read the script a few more times, Eric joked. Do you know who killed with a 38 now? Jeffrey shook his head. If you tell me what Beth said after she was shot by the male lead Nick, I'll be 100% sure. Eric kept him in suspense. Maybe it was I was wrong, comma, I let you down, comma, I love you, or something like that. I think the most unlikely thing is I love you. The most likely thing is I was wrong, Jeffrey said. Eric was stunned. In fact, this sentence was originally, I love you. However, Eric felt that it would be difficult to say, I love you, before death when you were shot by the person you loved deeply without hesitation. Therefore, when he was writing the script, Eric made a small change and only left the word, I, for the audience to guess. Just like in Shock Island, leaving some suspense would be more beneficial to the box office. On the stage, after the main creators of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles took turns to give their speeches, the movie started to play. When he saw the scene on the screen again, Eric could not help but frown slightly. This was a strong B-grade Hong Kong movie. Although the total cost of $13 million was definitely a super big production for a Hong Kong movie, it could barely be considered a medium cost in Hollywood. Coupled with the fact that some special effects had to be used in the movie, the result was obvious. For example, in one of the scenes, when a group of people were fighting, a criminal with a knife cut a wire. Even if you did not have the ability to do lighting effects here, you should at least add some electric sizzling sound. But in the end, there was none. The criminal's body only trembled a few times, and it looked like he had been electrocuted. It looked a little funny. Of course, this was mainly because Eric's appetite had been spoiled by the special effects blockbusters in his previous life. Although Eric kept frowning, the audience in the movie theater who attended the premiere laughed from time to time at the words and martial arts moves of the 4 Ninja Turtles. Some of them even exclaimed softly. When the main creators of the movie, who were still a little nervous, heard these noises, they all breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps it was because of the budget of the movie, or perhaps it was the usual practice of Hong Kong movies, but the movie was only 90 minutes long. It finished very quickly. Before the lights were turned on, there was a warm applause in the movie theater. A wonderful sci-fi action movie. Although many parts of the production are not satisfactory, with a $13 million investment, this is an outstanding movie. The mockery of the Renaissance characters in the movie from time to time is hilarious. The movie's action design also has many points. It's worth watching. After the premiere, all kinds of reviews came in. Because of Firefly's vigorous publicity and public relations, the overall reviews of the movie were very positive. Many newspapers gave it high marks. Although there were a few fierce criticism articles from time to time, they did not cause much of a stir. Although the 7 major movie companies did not want to see the movie succeed, in the face of Firefly's relentless publicity, no one would spend hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to discredit the movie. What's more, the 7 major movie companies were not particularly optimistic about the movie. Otherwise, Fox would not have refused to release Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles after watching the movie. Under the attention of many people, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles earned $25 million in the first weekend box office in 2,000 theaters in North America 3 days later, which surprised many people. And Fox, who had misjudged again, fired several executives in a short time. Including the Golden Jade Alliance incident, Fox was inevitably ridiculed by many media outlets. In the face of this situation, Fox could not speak of his bitterness. After a full week, the box office of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the first week was released, reaching $32 million. Seeing this result, many of the media outlets that were still complaining were silent. People in the Hollywood circle also realized that after the storm at the beginning of the year, Firefly was not affected in any way. The news that Eric was the first to be optimistic about the movie was inevitably revealed, which once again caused a heated discussion in the Hollywood circle. In addition to the few movies that Eric participated in, including Steel Magnolias, this was also the second time that a movie that others were not optimistic about but was optimistic about by Eric was a big success. For a time, many people began to inquire about which movies Eric was optimistic about. Therefore, a series of copyrights that Eric asked Drew to purchase before the new year once again attracted the attention of many people. Because the little girl was not in a hurry, Eric only bought more than half of the more than 20 copyrights listed. After the 2 copyrights that were being negotiated were discovered, all the powerful film companies in Hollywood joined in the competition, and the copyright owners were also waiting for a good price. In this case, Eric could only ask Drew to stop the acquisition of copyrights. Although there were still a few movies that had not been obtained, if he made a move now, it would definitely be a crazy scramble. The certainty of getting it was extremely low. Moreover, the adaptation rights of several movies that Eric valued the most, such as Charlie's Angel, Mission Impossible, and Bourne's Identity, had already been obtained. Of course, these were all in the future. After the success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the person with the most complicated feelings was undoubtedly Robert Shea. After all, if Robert Shea could wait for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to be released in the first half of the year, then the new line would be completely different. Chapter 303. In an old-fashioned prison on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a man and a woman were confronting each other through a glass door. "Then, let's do this test." The woman in a rustic brown striped coat but with a very beautiful face tried to persuade him. "No, but I'll make you happy. I'll give you a big chance." "What?" the woman asked doubtfully. The man in a prisoner's uniform behind the glass window interrupted the woman and said, "It's a promotion. Listen, Chris Starling, you should reflect on yourself and find out about my former patient, Miss Murphy." The woman tried hard to seize the initiative of the conversation, and in the end, she barely managed to get a word in. But in the face of the aggressive man on the other side of the glass door, the woman's efforts seemed insignificant and were completely suppressed. "I believe Miles won't act up so soon, although he's a madman," the man said. Suddenly, he raised his voice and shouted at the woman, "Now go!" The woman was so scared that she shrank her neck slightly and left in a hurry amidst the frantic shouts of the prisoners in the other rooms of the prison. Cut. "Very good. It's impeccable," Jonathan Dimey, who was standing behind the monitor with his headphones on, shouted excitedly. He had been watching Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins's performance. At the same time, the crew members around him also applauded enthusiastically. "Mr. Hopkins, your performance was great," Elizabeth, who was still clapping, complimented Anthony Hopkins after he walked out of the room. "Thank you, Miss Murdoch. In fact, Miss Foster's performance was also very good. Without her cooperation, I don't think I could have gotten into the groove so quickly." "Mr. Hopkins, I have to admit that I'm not as good as you in this part," Jodie Foster said with a smile as she took a towel from her assistant and wiped the sweat off her face. "Okay, you're all great, so I think we should stop complimenting each other," Drew, who was standing next to Elizabeth, said with a smile. Then he looked at Jonathan Dimey and said, "Mr. Dimey, is that all for today's shooting?" "Yes, Miss Barrymore. We've finished filming the scenes here. Although we still have more than an hour, we won't be able to prepare for the next scene," Jonathan Dimey said as he came over. He then instructed his assistant to prepare for the next scene. Drew looked at his watch and then said to everyone, "Then Julia and I will leave first. We're flying to Los Angeles at 4:30. "Of course, no problem. I'll get the driver to take you to the airport," Jonathan Dimey said immediately. It was already the 4th day of filming for The Silence of the Lambs in Pennsylvania. As TG Films' first movie, Elizabeth, Drew, and Julia attached great importance to it. Therefore, they arrived here before filming started. The 3 of them had already stayed in Pittsburgh for a week. Because the 3 women were the producers of this movie, Jonathan Dimey was originally worried that the 3 of them would criticize the filming. However, after the filming began, this worry quickly dissipated. First of all, Elizabeth and Drew seemed to be following the crew around with the attitude of learning. Not only did they not cause any trouble, but they also helped from time to time. Among the three of them, Julia, who was the most famous, was the least worrisome. She did not care about anything at all. As a popular Hollywood actress, Julia had her own work to do. Although Drew wanted to stay with Elizabeth on the set, she was still a minor. No one dared to let her stay on the set for too long. In addition, Eric still did not know that Drew was the producer of The Silence of the Lambs. When he heard that the girl was here, he specially called her and told her not to play too much and to return to Los Angeles as soon as possible. Therefore, Drew and Julia booked today's plane tickets together and planned to return to Los Angeles. As the main producer, Elizabeth would continue to follow the crew until the filming ended. In the lobby of the Pittsburgh airport, Elizabeth hugged the girl and then hugged Julia. Under Drew's slightly raised eyebrows, Elizabeth gently kissed the girl's lips before saying, "Goodbye, Julie and Drew. Have a safe trip." "Goodbye." The two women waved at Elizabeth and walked to the boarding gate with their assistants. After the Boeing plane entered the stratosphere, Drew unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at Julia, who was sitting next to him and flipping through a fashion magazine in boredom. "Julia, you and Liz." Julia, who was originally a little absent-minded, suddenly heard the girl say this and a look of panic flashed across her face. "You? What do you mean?" The girl pursed her lips and said, "You two are staying in the same hotel room for the next few days. Don't forget, I'm next door and can hear a lot of things. We're just—" Julia wanted to find a reason to refute, but Drew quickly patted Julia's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, I won't discriminate against you." "Ah." Julia opened her mouth and looked at the girl's serious face. She couldn't help but ask, "Don't you think it's weird?" After hearing Julia's question, Drew immediately showed a strange expression. "You guys are already like that, do you still think it's weird?" Julia nodded honestly. "If it's weird, then why are you still like Liz?" Drew asked curiously. "I don't know, I just think, well, it's not bad being with Liz. Liz also thinks it's not bad, so that's how it is." The girl didn't understand what Julia was trying to say, but she realized that the girl hadn't completely changed her sexual orientation yet. It was just that for some reason, she temporarily became a fake couple with Elizabeth. How can this be? She has to change. It's best if she becomes disgusted when she sees someone. Oh no, when she sees men. Thinking of this, Drew rolled his eyes and said, "Julia, this is just an inherent concept that you've formed since you were young. There are countless gay people in Hollywood, so you don't have to feel any psychological burden. I think you and Liz are a good match, and Liz is also very considerate to you, isn't she?" Hearing Drew say the word gay without any scruples, Julia's eyes flashed a few times in panic. How could she understand the little girl's thoughts? She thought that the little girl was really thinking for her. After thinking about what Drew said, she felt that it made sense, so she breathed a sigh of relief and nodded slightly. Perhaps the little girl felt that the fire wasn't big enough, so she continued to fan the flames. "Julia, maybe you don't know, but Jodie Foster is actually gay too." This time, Julia was really shocked. She turned her head to look at the little girl and asked in disbelief, "No, that's not possible, right?" Drew nodded with certainty and said, "This is absolutely true, but Jodie is more low-key. However, a lot of people know that she's gay." Apparently, it was because of Sinclair's assassination of the president that she was completely disappointed in men, so she changed her sexual orientation. Julia nodded softly and didn't say anything else. She looked at the magazine in front of her again. A few hours later, the plane landed at the Los Angeles airport. Because of the time difference, it was still evening in Los Angeles. Drew and Julia got into two separate cars. After dropping off her assistant in the city center, the little girl directly ordered the driver to drive to Malibu Point Manor. "Hey Ron, it's me, open the door," Drew directly shouted at the security guard at the gate when they arrived at the manor. The security guard quickly opened the gate when he heard Drew's voice, then he greeted, "Miss Barrymore, you're back?" "Yes. Is Eric home?" "Yes, Mr. Williams has been staying at home for the past 2 days," said the security guard named Ron. Looking at the suitcase Drew was pulling, Ron asked eagerly, "Miss Barrymore, do you want me to help you with your luggage?" "No need. Oh, by the way, why are you the only one here? Where's the other one?" Drew looked suspiciously at the empty security booth behind Ron and warned, "Don't tell me the other one isn't here." No, Miss Barrymore, George went to the toilet. "He'll be back soon," Ron quickly explained for his colleague, then pointed not far away. "Look, he's back." The little girl followed Ron's gaze and saw the other security guard. Then, she nodded and did not say anything else. She pulled the small suitcase and walked to the villa. Along the way, the servants who were in charge of the manor greeted the little girl from time to time. As Eric could not be bothered with these trivial matters, most of the people here were selected by Drew. Therefore, although Drew was not staying here during this period of time, everyone still treated her as the mistress of the house when she came back. This attitude made the little girl very satisfied. Walking into the living room of the villa, the little girl looked around before saying, "Eric, I'm back." A moment later, Nicole walked out of the kitchen with her hair standing up on the back of her head and a small apron around her waist. She looked like she was at home. "Hi, Drew." Nicole greeted and stepped forward to take the little girl's luggage. Only then did Drew react. She sized up Nicole's outfit and a sense of hostility arose in the little girl's heart. "Why are you here?" After all, Nicole had been with Drew for a few months. How could she not hear the hostility in the little girl's voice? However, the little girl was not displeased. She brushed the scattered strands of hair from her temples and casually said, "I happen to have nothing to do these days, so I came over to stay for a few days." "Humph, it's because of the female lead of Ghost, right? You really put in a lot of effort." "I don't have a choice. I don't want to be someone who's so spoiled that she'll grant every request. I can only fight for it myself." The little girl snorted again, but there was a hint of pride on her face. Since Eric didn't take the initiative to ask, it means you're not the female lead he wants at all. Chapter 304. Nicole shrugged non-committally and said, "It doesn't matter. I've also received a lot of offers. I just happened to live here and asked Eric to help me pick one. His vision has now spread throughout Hollywood. I heard that part of the credit goes to you." Hearing Nicole's words, Drew glared at the girl unhappily and asked, "Where's Eric?" "In the study, discussing something with a guest. Help me put my things in my room." The girl pushed the suitcase in her hand in front of Nicole and ran to the door of the study. Nicole looked at the small suitcase in front of her and frowned slightly. Soon, a mysterious smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She pulled the suitcase up and walked up the stairs. At the door of the study on the basement floor, Drew quickly pressed a few keys on the password lock. The door opened automatically. She walked down the spiral stairs, but did not see Eric. Drew immediately realized that Eric must be in the study on the second floor. There were so many private things like scripts in this room. Unless it was someone close to him, Eric would not have brought them in. She walked up the stairs to the study on the second floor. Pushing the door open, Drew saw Eric sitting opposite a brown-haired man, discussing something. Hearing the movement behind the door, the brown-haired man turned his head. Drew saw the man's face clearly. She had a good memory and recognized him at a glance. The middle-aged man was the boss of the publishing house where Eric published Jurassic Park, Michael Klaus. "Hello, Mr. Klaus." Michael Klaus saw Drew call out his name without hesitation and stood up in surprise. "Hello, Miss Barrymore. I didn't expect you to remember me. We only met once at the party last year, right?" Drew shook hands with Michael Klaus, then turned around the desk and threw herself into Eric's arms like a swallow returning to its nest. She rubbed against the man's face and said, "Eric, I missed you so much." Eric smiled and stroked the girl's hair. "All right, stop fooling around. The guests are here. Go and make us another pot of coffee. We just finished it." "Humph, you've just come back and you're already ordering me around," the little girl muttered in dissatisfaction, but she still jumped up and walked out briskly. "Drew has always been like this. Sorry for making a fool of himself, Eric explained helplessly as he looked at the dumbfounded Michael Klaus. Michael Klaus smiled awkwardly and said, "No, nothing. Let's continue talking about The Matrix." "Eric, I think this novel is too short. It's only about 50,000 words. Many of the things written are wrong. I think it would be better if it could be expanded to 200,000 words." "I want to do that too, Michael, but you should know that I don't have that much time now. It's already good enough to write 50,000 words. Also, you should know that I wrote this novel only for the movie rights," Eric said. The two of them were talking about the famous The Matrix. Because of the release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and some other things in the past, Eric's vision for movies had been spread all over Hollywood. As an industry with high risks, it was inevitable that Hollywood filmmakers would be fascinated by this kind of thing. Therefore, Drew's silent acquisition of the movie rights was criticized. After this incident, Eric's original plan to get the script of The Matrix from the Carpenter brothers could no longer be carried out. In his previous life, The Matrix had only appeared in 1999, and the concept of The Matrix was at most some random ideas in the minds of the two brothers who were still working as carpenters and painters. Eric did not hesitate to write it out, and made some specious changes, which made the novel and the movie a lot different. However, the main storyline did not change much. Although it was only about 50,000 words, it was enough to fill the hole, and he would not have to worry about copyright issues in the future. "Eric, actually, this story is quite interesting, so I think maybe I can find someone to expand the story to 200,000 words. Don't worry, there won't be any problems with the copyright. I promise to sign a complete contract with the hired gunman." Eric immediately shook his head. "Michael, finding a gunman is a very risky thing. In the future, when the benefits reach a certain level, I promise that the gunman will jump out, so I won't take this risk." As the two of them were talking, Drew came in with a pot of coffee. He poured coffee for the two of them and curiously picked up the manuscript between them. He asked, "What are you talking about?" "The Matrix. A very interesting name." Michael Klaus looked at Drew, who was sitting on the sofa next to him with the manuscript, and looked at Eric helplessly. "It's okay, let's continue talking." Eric gave Michael Klaus a reassuring look. He knew that Michael Klaus was worried that the girl would hear something she shouldn't and spread the news. Michael Klaus said, "Then, Eric, since you don't agree, forget it. I want to ask about Dark War. Have you ever thought of turning this story into a novel?" "Michael, the copyright of Dark War is jointly owned by Firefly and Columbia. The first book in the series got more than $400 million at the global box office. Then, with the sequels, the box office value may exceed $1 billion. With such a huge amount of money involved, Columbia won't agree to turn this series into a novel for a few $100,000 or at most a few $1 million in royalties. That's a pity." Michael Klaus shook his head and chatted with Eric about the details of the publication of The Matrix. Michael Klaus politely declined Eric's invitation to stay for dinner and said goodbye. Eric walked Michael Klaus out of the villa and waited for him to drive to the gate of the manor before returning to the villa. "Wow, Eric, how did you come up with this? You can even do this." As soon as they entered the living room, the little girl excitedly waved the script in her hand and said to Eric. Eric snatched the manuscript of The Matrix back from the girl and asked, "When did you come back?" "I came here as soon as I got off the plane." Drew smiled and hugged Eric's arm, then followed Eric into the basement study. "Then why did you go to the set of Silence of the Lambs? It's fine if you're filming in Los Angeles, but you actually went to Pennsylvania?" Chapter 305. Hearing this question, Drew laughed and said, "I'm just curious. By the way, I also brought back a gift for you. It's in my suitcase. I'll give it to you tonight. You must be hiding something from me." Eric knocked on the girl's head and said, "If you get into trouble, you better not let me be the last to know. Otherwise, I won't care about you." "Humph, if you don't care, who will?" After Eric sat down in the office chair, the girl let go of his arm and said. Eric smiled and picked up the folder on the table. He opened it and said casually, "Oh, you're still blaming me." "This is obvious," the girl said. She looked at the documents in Eric's hand and asked casually, "What are these?" "The list of candidates for the male cast of Ghost," Eric answered. The little girl casually pulled out a few pieces of information and pulled a chair over to flip through them, exclaiming, "Wow, he's so handsome." Eric shook his head helplessly and didn't say anything. He continued to flip through the pages. The casting for Ghost was very different from the casting for Eric's previous movies. In the past, he would release the news of the audition and then accept the files submitted by the actors for the audition. However, with Eric's current status, if he were to use the method of fishing for fish in the sea for casting, the number of files he would receive would probably explode Firefly's mailroom. Furthermore, there would be a huge problem with the selection process. Therefore, a series of prerequisites were set for the 3 major agencies for the casting of Ghost this time, so that they could recommend qualified actors. Although many actors from small agencies might lose the opportunity because of this, it could not be helped. Hollywood had always been so unfair. No one could change it. Even so, Eric now had hundreds of copies of the male lead actor's information in his hands. As for the original male and female lead of Ghost, Eric did not consider it at the beginning. Because of some information in his memory, Eric did not like Demi Moore. This reason was enough. With his current status, there was no need to explain the reason to anyone. As for Patrick Swayze, Eric still felt that he was more suitable to act in an action film. The male lead in the movie, Sam, was set to be a department manager of a Wall Street investment bank. However, Eric felt that Patrick Swayze was more suitable to play the security guard at the entrance of the investment bank. In his memory, Demi Moore's performance in Ghost was barely commendable, but Patrick Swayze was completely a male vase, and a very ugly one at that. Eric felt that the male lead of this movie should first have the aura of a successful bank manager. Secondly, it would be best if he had a literary aura. Actually, when he was considering the male lead, he had quickly thought of someone. That's right, Tom Cruise. Cruise's acting skills, image, and box office appeal were all in line with Eric's requirements. Although there was some estrangement between the two of them because of their last cooperation in Doc War, Eric still sent an invitation to Cruise. Cruise also responded. There were no details, only an appointment for a face-to-face meeting the next day. Cruise had not produced any movies since he left CAA to set up his own production company. However, Eric also asked someone to find out that Cruise's production company was now preparing for a movie. It was an investment from Paramount, and Cruise and his partner, Paula Wagner, were both producers. Therefore, although Eric agreed to meet the next day, he did not have high expectations for Cruise's participation in Ghost. It was better to patiently choose from the actors in front of him. Eric was looking at the information in the study, chatting with Nicole from time to time. Before he knew it, the sky outside had turned completely dark. Nicole called the two of them to finish dinner at around 7 o'clock. "Let's go and have dinner. I'm sure you're hungry. By the way, tonight's the premiere of Who Will Be a Millionaire? I put all the questions you've been thinking about in the question bank. They might appear tonight," Eric said as he walked out of the study with Nicole. In the dining room, Drew sat at the table and talked about what he had seen during the filming of The Silence of the Lambs in Pennsylvania. Nicole sat next to Eric and put food in his bowl from time to time. She looked gentle and considerate. If the girl who spoke was 10 years younger, they would look like a family of 3. After dinner, Drew could not wait to go to a small living room. He turned on the TV and tuned to Fox. The show had not started yet. Soon, Eric carried a laptop into the living room. He sat down on the sofa, put the laptop on his knees, and tapped on it casually. Even though it was IBM's latest laptop, it was still very clumsy and ugly compared to the one in his previous life. Moreover, the specs were so low that it made one's hair stand on end. However, it was impossible to find a good laptop on the market, so Eric could only make do with it. Anyway, he was only writing scripts and looking at documents. Although the computer's memory was very low, it was enough for office use. After Nicole finished washing the dishes, she quickly carried a plate of fruit into the living room and sat down on the other side of Eric. She looked at Eric's nimble fingers on the keyboard and a trace of admiration flashed in her eyes. What did this man not know? Wow, it's starting. Eric, don't be busy. Let's watch TV, okay? Eric nodded and closed the laptop. Who will become a millionaire? Was very simple. There was a stage in the middle. The host and the contestants sat on both sides. Below the stage was a circle of live audience. Behind the stage was a big screen. The questions could be seen on the screen. The contestants were divided into several groups. Each group had to go through a short round of competition. Whoever answered enough questions first would get the chance to go on stage and answer the questions face to face with the host. Eric, why do I feel like it's very different from the proposal I've seen before? Many of the settings aren't used, and the questions aren't categorized. I remember that in the proposal you wrote, there was a setting where the guests could choose a certain type of question. Oh, I'm so disappointed, Drew complained as he leaned on Eric. Eric casually explained, this is a strategy. What strategy? Drew asked curiously. Nicole also looked over. This is done to facilitate the upgrading of the show and to prolong the life of the show. If the show is set to be perfect from the beginning, then there won't be much room for change in the future. This way, when the audience gets tired of it, the life of the show will come to an end. But now, the show doesn't seem to be perfect at the beginning. Some of the novelty segments are kept. After a period of time, when the audience gets tired of the show and the ratings drop, they will be pushed out in time to arouse the audience's interest again. Just like the clothes that you girls wear, every year those clothing companies will come out with new styles. Although the changes are not too big, as long as there is this gimmick and appropriate advertising, then customers will be able to easily swipe their cards and pay for it. So that's how it is. The girl nodded her head in understanding. Nicole also revealed a thoughtful expression. On the TV, the first contestant had been selected and stepped onto the middle stage. After a simple self-introduction, they quickly began to answer the questions. Although some of the segments at the beginning of the show were relatively simple, in terms of setting the atmosphere, Firefly and Fox put in a lot of effort. Every sentence from the host, every prompt from the TV, and even the countdown sound made the audience nervous. Moreover, the questions at the beginning were very simple. Although a single guest on the stage might hesitate, if there was a family sitting in front of the TV, they might be able to come up with an answer after a few words of discussion. This situation also made the audience in front of the TV feel a sense of superiority and quickly fell in love with this kind of show. Wow, what's the highest plateau in the world? You don't even know such a simple question. Even I know. Sigh, Eric, is this a shill you guys hired? You're deliberately keeping people in suspense. Drew looked at the hesitant middle-aged man from Ohio on the TV and asked suspiciously. Eric shrugged and said, "How is that possible? This show pursues authenticity. These people were selected from all over the United States. Plus, other TV stations and media are watching. If we found someone to fake this and it was exposed, it would be very harmful to the popularity of the show. Although this is indeed a very simple question, everyone has their own knowledge blind spots. No one can say for sure when they will encounter a bottleneck." Drew nodded and reluctantly believed Eric's words. After the guest on the TV used this opportunity to ask for help, he successfully completed the question. Eric did not follow the British version system of 15 questions. Instead, he chose 12 questions and also set 2 guaranteed points for the 5th and 10th questions. Because it was the first show, the production team specifically chose some very outstanding guests. Also, they did not mind a millionaire appearing on the first show. This would stimulate the audience's interest. Because he just came back from the East Coast, Drew insisted on watching more than half of the show before he fell asleep on Eric's lap. When the show was about to end, the phone in the living room rang. Nicole consciously stood up and picked up the phone. Eric picked up the call and said a few words before hanging up. "What's up?" Nicole vaguely heard a few words and asked curiously. "The rough ratings are out," Eric looked at Nicole and said calmly. "The peak ratings are 33 million, the average is 28 million, not as good as Friends." Nicole secretly clicked her tongue. An average of 28 million viewers. After stabilizing, it would definitely be a high-rating show with more than 20 million viewers. For a show like this, the advertising fee for each episode was no less than $5 million, which was the same as her current salary. It was already good enough for her to take on 1 or 2 movies a year. Her salary was also very unstable. However, this show could earn her $5 million every week. If her salary was maintained at the current level, this show's annual income was probably equivalent to her acting in movies for a lifetime. Eric, how much can Firefly get from this show? Nicole could not help but ask. Eric looked at the girl. Although this was not too important, it was not suitable to announce it everywhere. We share the copyright with Fox, so the advertising fee is split 50/50. The producers and the broadcasters are also split 50/50. Moreover, the profits from the videotapes of such variety shows were very small. Therefore, even if the viewership ratings were similar to that of Friends, the final profits would be far less than that of Friends. However, this kind of show can bring more popularity. Any TV series has an age limit, but this variety show does not have many restrictions. I believe that people from 8 to 80 years old will be very interested. Although Eric said a little too much, Nicole was quickly calculating in her heart. Then she realized that Eric could get $1 million every week from this movie. $1 million every week. Compared to this, her current salary was not even worth mentioning. The show on the TV had unknowingly ended. Eric looked strangely at Nicole, who was still sitting on the sofa thoughtfully. He picked up the sleeping girl and said, "It's late, you should rest early. I'll send Drew back to his room." "Oh, okay." Nicole nodded quickly. Eric sent Drew back to his room and then went back to his own room to wash up. Not long after he turned off the lights, the bedroom door was gently pushed open. "Drew, is that you?" Eric asked, thinking that the girl had come to get tired of him again. "It's me," Nicole said softly in the dim light. Eric was about to turn on the lights when he heard Nicole's voice, but he stopped. The girl floated over and went into his arms. The sound of water in the bathroom stopped after a while. Eric muttered in his heart that women were troublesome to take a shower, but he did not care. He turned his body and closed his eyes slightly. After a while, Nicole came out again and curled up in Eric's arms. "By the way, Nicole, we didn't use any safety measures just now. Is it okay?" Nicole hesitated for a moment, as if she was thinking about something, but she quickly understood. She shook her head gently and said to Eric, "Don't worry, it's okay." Eric paused. At this time, he could not say anything harsh. He could only say again, "I don't want to have a child so early. Now is not a good time. I'm not sure if I can be a good father if I have a child." "I understand." Nicole nodded obediently in the dark. Her eyes flickered a few times, then dimmed. Although she had some thoughts in her heart, if she still ignored Eric's words, then there would be no good result. Eric seemed to understand Nicole's disappointment, and he quickly comforted her. "By the way, I have a date with Tom Cruise tomorrow. I need a female companion. You can come with me." "Tom Cruise?" Nicole asked. She didn't understand why Eric would mention this person inexplicably. She still had some understanding of Eric's habits. If there was no reason, Eric would not suddenly do such an inexplicable thing. Eric said, "Yes, it's about the male lead of Ghost. To be honest, I don't like him. However, he is indeed very suitable for this role, but I don't have much hope. I'm just trying to get in touch with him. Cruise now has his own production company. I think the other party's offer will definitely not be too low. The possibility of negotiation is very low." "Oh." Nicole nodded non-committally. At noon the next day, Eric took Nicole to a famous restaurant in Beverly Hills. After saying a few words to the waiter, a waiter took him and Nicole to the prearranged seats. Looking at the time, it was almost 12 o'clock. There were less than 5 minutes before the appointed time. Eric originally thought that Cruise should have arrived long ago, but he did not expect that the other party had not arrived yet. In this case, he had no expectations for the purpose of this time. Nicole sat next to Eric, looking at the menu in her hand in boredom. She asked Eric curiously, "It should be here, right?" Obviously, the girl had already felt that something was wrong. Eric smiled awkwardly. There was a trace of displeasure in his heart, but he did not show it. He said, "Don't worry." "Yes, but in Hollywood, there are still people who can make me wait." Nicole nodded non-committally. She could see that Eric was a little absent-minded. Therefore, she also realized that this meeting would not be smooth. 12 o'clock passed quickly, and Cruz still did not appear. Eric played with the tableware in his hand. He was about to ask the waiter to serve a cup of coffee for the two and continue to wait when Cruz's voice sounded behind him. "I'm really sorry, Eric. There was a traffic jam on the road. You know, in a place like Los Angeles, there are traffic jams almost every day. Although I was prepared in advance, I still accidentally ate it," Cruz said. But it was obvious that the other party's face was not too apologetic. "It's okay. We just arrived." Eric shook hands with the other party, and then shook hands with Paula Wagner, who was next to Cruz. Paula Wagner also apologized to Eric. Her attitude was much more sincere than Cruz's. Chapter 306. "Hi, Miss Kidman. I'm Tom Cruise. You can call me Tommy. Wow, you're so pretty, even prettier than in the movies. Can I call you Nicole?" As Eric was chatting with Paula Wagner, he heard Tom Cruise's courteous voice behind him. "Of course, Mr. Cruise," Nicole's voice sounding a little distant. However, Cruise didn't seem to notice anything and began to talk about other topics. Paula Wagner smiled awkwardly at Eric, secretly blaming Cruz for his inappropriate behavior. Nicole Kidman was Eric's female companion, so their relationship was obvious. Eric turned his head and saw that Cruz had already sat opposite Nicole. He had no choice but to say to Paula Wagner, "Then, Miss Wagner, let's sit down too." "Okay, Eric, I'm really sorry," Paula Wagner said apologetically in a soft voice. "It's nothing," Eric said, returning to the table and sitting down. He called the waiter over and they began to order. "Nicole, the pan-fried foie gras here is very good. It said that the ingredients are all flown in directly from France. I think you should have one," Cruz said to Nicole with a smile after flipping through the menu for a while. "Sorry, Mr. Cruz, I'm on a diet." Nicole shook her head gently, then ordered a salad from the waiter and closed the menu. The smile on Cruz's face faded a little, but there was more interest in his eyes. Eric and Paula Wagner quickly finished ordering. After the waiter left, Cruz said without hesitation, "I'm sorry, Eric. I've read the script of Ghost, but the movie that Paula and I are working on is about to start shooting, so I definitely can't take on that role. To be honest, I think that playing a ghost sounds stupid. Also, I've studied the whole script and didn't find anything interesting. I suggest that you try another movie, such as the second part of Dark War. Although I can't take part in it, I believe that with the popularity of the first movie, the box office success is assured." Hearing Cruz's words, Paula Wagner placed her hand on her forehead and gently rubbed her temple twice. Clearly, Cruz's old habit of thinking too highly of himself had resurfaced. He had completely forgotten her previous instructions. Nicole opened her mouth slightly, then picked up the juice in front of her and put it to her mouth to hide the sneer on her face. Eric put his hands on the table and kept rubbing them, listening to Cruz's words with great interest. When Cruz finished, Eric looked at him with great interest and said, "In that case, Tommy, why did you invite me here today?" Paula Wagner was afraid that Tom Cruise would say something inappropriate, so she quickly answered Eric's question and said, "Mr. Williams, Tommy is such a person. He doesn't like to keep anything to himself, so please don't mind him. We think that the script of Ghost is very good, but Tommy's schedule has already been arranged, so we can't work together this time." "Oh, then this time," Eric continued. Tom Cruise was about to speak when he felt his calf being kicked under the table. He looked at Paula Wagner and saw that she had a faint pleading look on her face, so he could only shrug and shut his mouth. Seeing that Tom Cruise finally stopped talking, Paula Wagner was relieved. She said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, didn't Firefly's Flower Pictures acquire the rights to many novels and movies last year? One of them is a TV series called Mission Impossible. I want to ask if you can transfer it to us. We'll definitely give you a very reasonable price. Eric raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, Ms. Wagner, why are you interested in this TV series? If it's a movie, it should be a spy action movie. It's very different from Tom's current screen image. Hearing Eric's words, Cruz couldn't help but interrupt again. See, Paula, Eric also thinks so I think it's better not to mention this matter anymore. I've already said that I'm not suitable for this kind of pure action movie. That's the role that Schwarzenegger or Stallone should play. I'm more suitable for dramas. Even if there are some action elements mixed in, it should be like Top Gun a few years ago and our recent movie. Eric, you should think so too, right? Eric smiled and echoed, of course, I also think that Tommy is more suitable for a narrative-driven genre film. It's very risky to change the genre rashly. Paula Wagner didn't know how to continue with the two men's interruption. She had a troubled look on her face as she helplessly looked at the man beside her who was feeling smug after being acknowledged. She then looked at Eric, who had a faint smile on his face. She didn't know why, but she felt that Eric's smile was a little strange. Bypassing the matter of the original Mission Impossible TV series, Eric quickly said, Tommy, let's talk about the movie you've been preparing recently. I'm sure many fans are looking forward to it. That's for sure. Tom Cruise was suddenly interested, but he kept looking at Nicole in front of him and said, a few years ago, when Mr. Paul Newman and I were working together on The True Color of Money, I became interested in racing, so I've always wanted to make a racing movie. In the script, the racing scenes in this movie will be very grand and exciting. Paramount has promised to invest $60 million in this movie. I believe that this movie will definitely achieve the box office glory of 1980s excess Top Gun. By the way, Nicole, the movie just happens to lack a female lead. Do you want to try? From the first time I saw you, I felt that you were very suitable for the role of Claire. When Nicole heard that the movie was worth $60 million, she immediately took action. She glanced at Eric and saw that the man had a non-committal look on his face, so she asked tentatively, Mr. Cruise, can you tell me more about this role? Of course, Claire is a doctor, and the male lead, Cole, met after a racing accident. Claire was quickly moved by Cole's strength and unyielding spirit, and fell in love with the male lead. Cruise spoke excitedly for 7 or 8 minutes. He only reluctantly paused when the waiter served them food. Nicole also tried to sound him out from time to time. Listening to the couple's conversation, Paula Wagner looked at Eric worriedly. Seeing that Eric was enjoying the food in front of him as if nothing had happened, she was slightly relieved. Ms. Wagner, are you still Tom's agent? Eric didn't pay attention to the couple's conversation. After eating a few mouthfuls of food, he suddenly raised his head and asked Paula Wagner. Paula Wagner didn't know why Eric suddenly asked this question, but she quickly answered, No, I'm now in charge of C/W Productions, so Tom has a new agent named Paula Jinsley. Eric sighed in his heart. Tom Cruise was really lucky. Even though he, an outsider, had entered this time and space, the two women who were very important to his career still appeared by his side. Paula Wagner could be said to be Tom Cruise's great benefactor. She had brought Cruise from a nobody to the A-list Hollywood superstars. Later, she had helped Cruise establish a production company and acted as the producer for a series of Cruise's movies. It could be said that half of Cruise's success could be attributed to Paula Wagner. After that, Cruise and Paula Wagner established the Cruise/Wagner production company. Paula Wagner became the head of the production company, and Cruise changed to another agent, Pi Jinsley. This female agent was also very capable. She had taken over Paula Wagner's position and conscientiously managed Cruise's affairs for 14 years. In more than a decade, although Cruise had caused a lot of trouble, and his conduct was a mess, under Paula Jinsley's protection, Cruise's public image had always been flawless. In his previous life, both Cruise and Nicole had Paula Jinsley as their agents. However, after Cruise and Nicole's divorce, Cruise's own career didn't improve much, but Nicole's skyrocketed. Not only was she crowned Best Actress at the Oscars, but she also entered the 20 million pay club. Cruise felt extremely unbalanced in his heart. He casually found an excuse that Pi Jinsley's public relations was not good at the Oscars and fired this hard-working agent. Then, he trivially asked his sister, who had no professional experience, to be his agent. It didn't take long for Cruise to taste the consequences of his actions. Without a strong agent to negotiate and manage his public image, a series of problems followed one after another. Negotiations with Paramount broke down, the sofa-jumping incident, Faith was attacked by the media, and scandals with actresses frequently appeared in the tabloids. In just over a year, Cruise's public image plummeted, and his acting career suffered a huge blow. In the following few years, Paula Wagner left Cruise's production company in disappointment. After that, except for the Mission Impossible series, Cruise's movies were almost always losing money. Because of this, Cruise couldn't be strong in the Mission Impossible series. The glory of receiving $75 million from a single movie was gone forever. Chapter 307. Hearing Paula Wagner's answer, Eric recalled some information in his mind and quickly said, "Actually, this is not bad. You can let go of a lot of unnecessary things and focus on being a producer. Maybe we can work together in the future." "Work together?" Paula Wagner asked doubtfully. Eric glanced at Cruise, who was standing beside Paula Wagner, who was talking about the movie Thunder aspirations. He then turned to Paula Wagner and said, "Yeah, I think you're a very capable agent. It just so happens that Firefly is also in a period of rapid expansion. They really need someone like you." Paula Wagner quickly understood the subtext in Eric's words. However, Paula Wagner had just set up her own film company with Cruise and was now full of ambition. She had no intention of jumping ship. "Mr. Williams, Tommy and I are very happy working together, so please don't mention this again. Of course, I know you won't agree to it now, but things are unpredictable. If you want to change working environment one day, Firefly's door is always open to you." As soon as Eric finished speaking, Cruise's voice rang out. "Hey, Eric, I'm still here. You're too much to poach my partner in front of me." Seeing that Cruise didn't seem to care at all, Eric also laughed. "Tommy, any company would be happy to accept an excellent film talent, so you have to keep a close eye on Ms. Wagner. Maybe she will jump ship at any time." Cruise looked at Eric as if looking at an idiot. "How is that possible? Paula won't leave. There's no other Tom Cruise in Hollywood." When Paula Wagner heard Cruise's words, her expression became a little uncomfortable. Cruise's words were a little too self-centered, completely ignoring the help Paula Wagner had given him over the years. Eric keenly caught the flash of embarrassment on the woman's face, and a smug smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This could be considered as planting a seed. Perhaps in a few years, Paula Wagner could be the producer of the Mission Impossible series again. This woman's ability was beyond doubt. As for the male lead, it wouldn't be Mr. Cruise anyway. Eric pondered and looked at Paula Wagner again. Soon, he thought of another woman. Maybe he could also try to poach another woman from Cruise. Pi Kingsley was also a very good agent. Moreover, 2 days ago, Eric happened to hear Nicole complain that her current agent was not very qualified. Eric knew that Nicole said that because she wanted him to go out, but her contract was changed to Kapoor's. However, Kapoor was now in charge of the contracts of several A-level stars, but there could be more. At this time, after listening to Cruise's explanation, Nicole shook her head slightly and said, "Mr. Cruise, I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer right away. I need to think about it." A look of disbelief appeared on Cruise's face as he asked, "Nicole, do you know about Top Gun from a few years ago?" Many unknown actors in that movie shot to fame, just like Meg Ryan. If she hadn't shown her face in Top Gun, she would never have had the chance to get the female lead role in When Harry Met Sally. I believe that Thunderbolt Aspirations won't be any worse than that movie. If you're the female lead, your acting career will definitely rise to another level. Nicole glanced at Eric beside her, hoping that he would put in a good word for her. Before Eric could even react, Cruise seemed to have understood something and said, "Nicole, don't tell me you're still thinking of taking on the role of the female lead in Ghost? I think Emily is just a bawling character in the script. She's just a pretty face who doesn't have any room to express herself. Hearing Cruz's words, Paula Wagner had the urge to touch her forehead again. Since her original goal of getting the copyright of Mission Impossible had been ruined by the two men, and coupled with Cruz's current situation, Paula Wagner did not dare to stay any longer. Although it seemed that no matter what Cruz said, Eric did not show any signs of anger, he was after all a hot-blooded young man. In Paula Wagner's opinion, Eric's attitude was no different from those pretentious young men who pretended to be mature. Who knew when he would explode? Therefore, when Cruz began to mercilessly belittle Eric's script again, Paula Wagner quickly interjected, "Tommy, I think we should go. We still have some work to do in the afternoon." Cruz was interrupted by Paula, but he quickly reacted. It was always those actresses who cried and begged to cooperate with him. Since the woman in front of him was not willing to cooperate with him, could he not find a female lead? "Nicole, think about it carefully, but we don't have much time," Cruz said with a smile. Then he snapped his fingers and called the waiter to settle the bill. "I will, Mr. Cruz." Nicole nodded politely. After settling the bill, Cruz and Paula Wagner left directly. Eric was still sitting there and asked the waiter to serve them a fresh pot of coffee. He then turned to the woman beside him and asked, "How do you feel?" Nicole thought for a moment and said, "Self-righteous and not very smart. He's also a mess when it comes to dealing with people." Eric winked and said, "It's easy to get hold of such a man." If it was before she starred in Sleepless in Seattle, Nicole would definitely have such thoughts. But now, she was an A-list actress in Hollywood. Why should she let herself be wronged? Getting along with a self-centered man like Cruz would definitely not be a good experience. She picked up the silver spoon next to her and stirred the coffee in front of her. She supported her chin with one hand and looked at Eric with sparkling eyes. She rarely took the initiative to say, "Actually, I want to get hold of another man." Eric did not expect the woman to suddenly bring up this topic. He said, "Give up early. You won't succeed. I'll always be a hunter, not a prey. Also, in Hollywood, there are only women I'm interested in and women I'm not interested in. There's no woman who can get hold of me." Nicole raised her eyebrows and asked, "What kind of woman am I?" Eric said without hesitation, "The kind that doesn't interest you." After being speechless for a moment, Nicole asked indignantly, "If you're not interested, why did you keep me when you met the woman in the audition for Dark War?" Eric tilted his head and thought for a moment before saying, "It's fun." Nicole stared at Eric in disbelief. After a moment, the woman suddenly showed a smug smile and said softly, "I understand." Eric did not expect Nicole to have such a reaction. He asked in confusion, "What do you understand?" Nicole said with certainty, "You're jealous. You must be jealous when you saw me talking to Tom Cruise." "Why do you think so?" Eric asked in surprise. "I mean, how can you tell that I'm jealous?" "I can tell from what you just said." Nicole raised her chin and continued, "I know you don't want to admit it, but you must be jealous." Eric smiled and shook his head. "Okay, you can think whatever you want." When Nicole heard Eric's answer, she thought that he had acquiesced. She felt smug for a moment, then came over and asked curiously, "What do you think of the movie Thunder Ambition that Tom Cruise is producing?" "If you want to accept it, then accept it. You don't have to ask for my opinion. You know, a man who's jealous deep down in his heart will definitely not say anything good." Nicole smiled and shook her head. "I won't accept it. The role of the female doctor is completely a vase, and she doesn't have many scenes. Even if this movie can get a high box office, it won't help my image much. Maybe the critics will criticize me for acting as a vase. Then there's nothing to say." Eric finished the coffee in his cup, got up, and walked out. Nicole quickly got up and followed Eric. "Hey, wait for me." The two came to the parking lot together. After Eric started the car, he continued, "By the way, didn't you say 2 days ago that your current agent is not good? Now there's a very good candidate." Nicole was puzzled. "You mean?" Eric also kept her in suspense. He said to Nicole, "Tom Cruise's current agent is called Pi Kingsley. Maybe you can try to get in touch with her. She's a very capable woman." Nicole was a little disappointed. Although Eric had sold UTA to ICM and Kapoor had become a partner of ICM, the two were still very close. Moreover, Kapoor's ability was also the highest in Hollywood. No matter what the consideration was, Nicole preferred to let Kapoor manage the agency. She originally thought that Eric would say this, but she didn't expect him to recommend an agent that she had never heard of. Eric also saw that Nicole didn't seem to be too satisfied. He had done it on the spur of the moment. At this moment, he shrugged and said, "It's up to you whether you want to or not. If you still want Kapoor to be your agent, then you can talk to him personally. As long as he's willing, I have no objections." Okay. I'll try looking for Pi Kingsley," Nicole said. Soon, a mischievous look flashed in her eyes. "However, aren't you worried that something will happen if Tom Cruise and I are under the same agent?" Eric pursed his lips and looked around. Then, he slowly stopped the car by the roadside and quickly unfastened the girl's seatbelt. After an unknown period of time, a cry of surprise came from inside the car. Eric glanced at the girl and started the car with a smirk. Then he said, "I'll give you a stamp. Remember, you're mine from now on." Nicole was worried for a while. When she heard Eric's words, she was even angrier. She stretched out her small fist and punched the man's shoulder a few times. "Eric Williams, you scoundrel, bastard." Chapter 308. Here, breakfast. Nicole casually placed the tray in front of Eric and walked to the other side of the table. Eric, who had just sat down at the table, looked at the food on the tray and asked, "Where's the milk? Also, like I said, I don't like fried bread. It's up to you whether you want to eat it or not. Also, I have to go to New York for a few days. I won't be staying here when I come back." "You can continue to let the servants prepare breakfast for you," Nicole said angrily as she poked the salad in front of her with her fork. Eric smiled and said, "You're still angry. Yesterday Drew left, and today you're leaving too. Won't I be alone in the villa again?" "Humph, that's none of my business. Anyway, if you wave your hand, there will definitely be women willing to throw themselves at you," Nicole said angrily. Eric touched his nose awkwardly and spread out today's newspaper on the table. He said, "It's all your fault. If you didn't take every opportunity to seduce me, this wouldn't have happened." I'm not talking to you." Nicole pursed her lips and lowered her head. She ate the breakfast in front of her in big bites. She chewed on the vegetable salad as if she was biting Eric. Nicole always looked calm and steady. Eric had never seen the girl lose her composure before. This was the first time he saw Nicole throw a tantrum. To be honest, she looked quite cute. He got up with a smile and poured himself a glass of milk from the fridge. He pushed it in front of Nicole and said, "Do you want a glass of milk? If you eat salads all the time, your body won't be able to take it. You're in such a good shape. Why are you suddenly on a diet?" "I still prefer the feeling of meat." Nicole glared at Eric again and poured herself a glass of milk. Eric smiled and drank a few mouthfuls of milk. He ate his breakfast and casually flipped through the newspaper in front of him. After a while, Eric suddenly put down the cutlery in his hand and picked up a newspaper. The photo on the newspaper was clear at a glance. It was the scene when he met Cruise yesterday. The photo was taken through a glass window, and only the backs of Eric and Nicole could be seen. However, the faces of Cruise and Paula Wagner were very clear. Tom Cruise criticized Ghost in front of Williams and is suspected to have fallen out with him. The famous Hollywood director Eric Williams' new film is in the midst of intense preparations, and the choice of the male and female leads has also become the focus of attention. Yesterday, our reporter discovered that Eric Williams and Tom Cruise met at a famous restaurant on Wilshire Boulevard in Hollywood. He suspected that Eric Williams had invited Tom Cruise to be the male lead in his new movie. However, through the analysis of Tom Cruise's lips, our reporter discovered that the negotiations between the two parties were not going well. Not long after the conversation began, Tom Cruise said that the male lead in Ghost was very stupid in front of Williams. Afterwards, Tom Cruise didn't talk much with Eric Williams about Ghost. Instead, he had a good chat with Williams' female companion, the Australian actress Nicole Kidman, who had become famous in Sleepless in Seattle. During the conversation, he invited Nicole Kidman to be the female lead in his new movie. He also criticized the female lead in Ghost for not having any room for acting, saying that she was just a crying vase. After Cruise and Paula Wagner parted ways with Williams, Williams and Nicole Kidman sat down and talked for a while. As their backs were facing each other, we didn't know what they were talking about. However, not long after, Williams stood up and left. Nicole Kidman anxiously followed him out of the restaurant. From the looks of it, our playboy was very dissatisfied with Nicole Kidman's conversation with Tom Cruise. Maybe it was because he didn't want Nicole Kidman to be cast in Cruise's new movie, so he left angrily. Williams and Nicole Kidman might have a rift because of Tom Cruise. Eric helplessly read the newspaper several times and then handed it to Nicole. Look, something happened again. Nicole took the newspaper in front of her and read it once. Then she curled her lips. The newspaper is right. There is a rift between us. Nicole, you look very cute when you're angry. If you don't believe me, you can look at yourself in the mirror. Humph. The girl coldly snorted and ignored Eric's teasing. She continued to eat her breakfast. Eric wasn't in the mood to eat breakfast. Although he didn't care about falling out with Cruise, he couldn't help but pay attention to Cruise's comments on Ghost in the newspaper. If they didn't make a clarification and counterattack as soon as possible, if the media turned their attention to the content of Ghost and spouted nonsense, it might create preconceived notions among the public and cause Ghost to be known as a bad film before it even started filming. Eric picked up the newspaper and went to the living room. He called Kapoor and discussed with him. Kapoor said that he would contact Cruise as soon as possible to make a statement. There was no comment about Eric and Nicole in the newspaper. It meant that the tabloid paparazzi only knew part of their conversation by lip-reading and didn't record it. This made Eric feel relieved. Otherwise, after Cruise and Paula Wagner left, the content of Eric and Nicole's conversation would be even more explosive and would definitely be exposed. After hanging up the phone, Eric returned to the dining room again. He looked at Nicole, who was still eating her breakfast slowly, and said with emotion, "The tabloid paparazzi can read lips. It seems that I have to be more careful with what I say in the future. Even if there's no one around, I can't speak carelessly." Nicole rolled her eyes at Eric and ignored him. Eric continued to eat breakfast and read the newspaper. However, this meal was destined not to be so peaceful. Eric soon saw the image of a man and a woman walking side by side in another newspaper. The man had an attentive look on his face, and the woman had a faint smile on her face. Eric shook his head, picked up the newspaper, got up, and went to the living room again. He made a phone call and gave some instructions. Finally, he returned to the dining room and finished his breakfast. After breakfast, Eric drove Nicole to the airport and then drove to the headquarters of Firefly. When he arrived at the company, it was almost 10 o'clock. However, he was just in time for the meeting with Robert Shea. Because of the box office success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it was inevitable that Robert Shea's mood was a little strange these days. Almost everyone who came into contact with Robert Shea noticed this. Robert Shea's temper had also become very irritable these days. This situation was actually very easy to understand. When Firefly bought the new line, the market value of the new line was only $150 million. Robert Shea took advantage of Eric's difficulties and barely managed to extort 10% of the shares from Eric, increasing his total share of Firefly's shares to 25%. But then, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was released. The movie earned more than $30 million in the box office in the first week. Robert Shea couldn't help but feel disappointed before he was overjoyed. This was because if he had insisted on not selling the new line back then, the current success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles would have been solely enjoyed by the new line. Based on the current trend of the box office, the movie would have no problem grossing more than $100 million. In the overseas market, the videotape market, and the surrounding market, it would be easy for the movie to earn hundreds of millions of USD in profits. In addition, the movie could be developed into a sequel. Therefore, the market value of the new line could at least double with the distribution rights of this movie. If only I hadn't sold it back then. Robert Shea had secretly regretted not selling it more than once these days, but it was all to no avail. In a small conference room at Firefly, the four people sat around a small conference table. Robert Shea introduced the two people beside him to Eric and said, "Eric, these two are Ronald Bass and Nancy Price. They are the screenwriter and the author of the original novel. This is the script. You can take a look at it first." Eric nodded and took the script. He looked at the title on the cover and raised his eyebrows slightly. It said, "Sleeping with the Enemy." In his memory, this was a movie starring Julia. It seemed to be doing very well at the box office. "Eric, is there a problem?" Robert Shea saw Eric's strange expression and thought that Eric was a little dissatisfied with the script. However, this time, with the success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robert Shea's confidence was greatly boosted. He even felt that even if he failed once, so what? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had already made a lot of money for Firefly. This money should have been his own. Therefore, Robert Shea made up his mind that no matter how much Eric objected, he would not make any compromises. Deep in his heart, Robert Shea even had the urge to fiercely argue with Eric. Hearing Robert Shea's words, Eric shook his head and said, "It's nothing." With that said, Eric opened the script and quickly flipped through the pages. After more than 10 minutes, Eric finished reading the script. He looked up at Robert Shea and said, "Robert, are you sure you want to make this movie?" Robert Shea nodded with certainty. "Eric, you said before that you won't interfere with my choice of script. As long as I choose, you will sign it." Eric could hear the unwillingness in Robert Shea's voice. Of course, he understood why. He chuckled and said, "Of course, I'll keep my word. The script for this thriller is not bad. By the way, do you have an actor in mind?" Robert Shea had originally planned to argue with Eric. Seeing that Eric did not raise any objections this time, he could not vent the inexplicable anger that he had accumulated. He suddenly became a little awkward and silent. After a while, Robert Shea said, "Yes, this is also the reason why I brought Ronald Bass and Nancy Price here today." "Ronald, you say it." Ronald Bass, who had been sitting beside Robert Shea, said, "Mr. Williams, it's like this. After the script was written, Nancy and I agreed that Julia Roberts was the most suitable female lead in this movie. However, we had previously sent an invitation, but Julia Roberts' agent quickly rejected it. Mr. Shea said that perhaps you could help. Robert, what do you think?" Eric looked at Robert Shea again. Robert Shea nodded and said, "I also think that Julia Roberts is very suitable to be the female lead of this movie. I even personally called Kapoor Sid. However, Kapoor said that Julia doesn't like the script, so she doesn't want to act. I think that with your relationship with Julia, you should be able to help persuade her." Eric rubbed the script and pondered for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, I'll try." "Eric, everyone knows about your relationship with Julia. Moreover, you were the one who persuaded Julia to act in Steel Magnolias. So, please give me an accurate answer, okay?" Robert Shea continued. Eric stared at Robert Shea for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, I promise that Julia will act in it, but you need to talk to Kapoor personally about the salary. Now that UTA is gone, Kapoor and I are just good friends, so it's impossible for Julia to make concessions on the salary with just a few words from me." "This is not a problem at all," Robert Shea said. "By the way, I have a preliminary estimate for this movie. The budget is about $30 million US. I also plan to find an A-level star to act as the male lead." Eric thought about the script he had just read and recalled the movies in his mind. He knew that this movie would definitely not cost $30 million US. Looking at Robert Shea, who was eager to argue with him, Eric sighed helplessly and said, "Okay, $30 million US it is." Robert Shea had nowhere to vent his pent-up anger again. He picked up the cup in front of him and drank a few mouthfuls of coffee in frustration. He did not know why, but he had mustered up all his energy today to argue with Eric or something else. But until now, Eric had not given him any chance. This was very different from Eric's usual personality. Robert Shea did not know what the problem was. Eric looked at Robert Shea with a faint smile on his face. His fingers jumped a few times on the script in front of him. He had already made up his mind. Even if Robert Shea chose a bad script, he would accept it and pay a sum of money to make Robert Shea realize the reality. It would be very cost-effective for Robert Shea to give up the idea of producing the movie himself and just focus on distributing it. And now, the script that Robert Shea chose was not a bad one, but a movie that could sell well. Therefore, he would not object. "Ronald, Nancy, go to my office and wait for a while. I have something to discuss with Eric. I will talk to you about the movie later." "Okay, Mr. Shea." Ronald and Nancy were also experienced people. They realized that the atmosphere between the two of them was not very harmonious, so they quickly left the office. "Eric, regarding the overseas distribution of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think it's best to let Disney distribute it. Michael Eisner offered a very high cut. If we do it ourselves according to your previous plan, I think we will earn at least $10 million less," Robert Shea said after the two of them left. "Michael Eisner contacted you?" Eric asked in surprise. "Of course." Robert Shea seemed to feel that he had finally caught the dissatisfaction in Eric's tone. He immediately said, "Eric, I know that Michael Eisner did target you some time ago, but it's all in the past. Moreover, you've already accepted the script for Ghost. So, I think it's time to put an end to this matter. Also, I contacted Michael Eisner for the benefit of Firefly. I have no selfish motives. If you like this work, you are welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile users, please read it at M. Chapter 309. Eric listened to Robert Shea's explanation without batting an eyelid. He tried his best to hide his sneer on the spot. Robert Shea said that he had no selfish motives, but on the surface, he looked open and aboveboard. However, Eric was certain that Michael Eisner had definitely discussed with Robert Shea before. There was no doubt that Michael Eisner had promised him some benefits. Otherwise, Robert Shea would not have betrayed him so obviously and wanted to give the overseas distribution rights of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Disney. With the success of a series of movies, Eric was no longer the young boy who had just entered Hollywood a year ago. His ambition was getting bigger and bigger. Moreover, Eric had told more than one person that his goal was the entire Hollywood. Under such circumstances, it was inevitable to recruit talents for his own use. He did not mind giving power to these people who could help him rise quickly. This was also one of the reasons why Eric was more patient with Robert Shea. Even during the storm some time ago, when Robert Shea clearly took advantage of the situation and took away 10% of Firefly shares, Eric endured it. At that time, Firefly's 5 movies at the end of the year had been very successful. Firefly had the rights to 5 more blockbuster movies. The 10% shares were far more than a mere $60 million could get. However, as long as Robert Shea could take care of Firefly wholeheartedly, Eric felt that the price was nothing. Now that New Line and Firefly had completely merged, when the profits of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were distributed at the end of the year, according to the proportion of each person's shares, Eric would take more than 70% of the profits. Robert Shea, the biggest contributor, could only get 25% of the dividends. Under such circumstances, it was understandable that Robert Shea was upset. Therefore, when Robert Shea played some tricks on sleeping with the enemy, Eric just let it be. However, now that he heard that Robert Shea wanted to give the overseas distribution rights of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Disney, Eric was completely disappointed with Robert Shea. It was not that he did not tell Robert Shea about his plans for Firefly. Although it had merged with New Line, Firefly's distribution ability was still relatively weak. Take Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for example. Because of Eric's affirmation, Firefly took out 2,000 TV screens in one go. However, that was also Firefly's limit. Because of the release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original small production left behind by New Line had to be pushed back because Firefly could no longer afford any theatrical resources. In contrast, any of the 7 major film companies, if necessary, could raise more than 5,000 screens to support the release of 2 or 3 big-budget films at the same time. Of course, ordinary film companies would not do so, because it would only form vicious competition. From the very beginning, Eric had planned to use the next few years to expand the domestic and overseas market with the advantage of Firefly's outstanding blockbuster movies. As long as they could establish a complete distribution channel, it didn't matter even if they earned less for a while. This was because a complete and powerful distribution channel was the foundation of a large film company's survival. After all, everyone knew that relying on the distribution channels of other film companies was not a long-term solution. Now, just because of the accidental success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robert Shaye's mentality was unbalanced to such an extent. As Firefly developed and grew stronger, the internal turmoil of Firefly in the future was almost inevitable. Firefly was the most important cornerstone for Eric to enter Hollywood. He would never allow this to happen. Then, there was only one solution, and that was to get rid of Robert Shaye. Although he had already made up his mind, Eric also knew that now was not a good time to do this. New Line and Firefly had just completed the integration. Now, most of the people in charge of the various departments were still Robert Shaye's direct subordinates. If Robert Shaye was immediately kicked out of the company, it was hard to say whether these people would leave with Robert Shaye under the influence of other forces. Once that happened, the distribution channels of New Line integrated by Firefly would soon be paralyzed. This was what Eric did not want to see in any case. "Eric, are you listening to me?" Robert Shaye saw Eric's distracted look and gently knocked on the table with a dissatisfied look on his face. "Oh, by the way, where were we just now?" Eric looked up and asked calmly. "I'm saying, how about handing over the overseas distribution of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Disney? I had someone calculate. According to the share Michael Eisner gave us, we can earn at least $10 million. Eric shook his head. "Robert, I don't agree." "Why?" Robert Shaye raised his voice. Eric said, "Robert, have you ever thought about why Michael Eisner gave us such good conditions?" "This is a win-win situation," Robert Shaye said after hesitating for a while. Eric immediately shook his head. "No, Robert. According to Firefly's current overseas distribution ability, perhaps if we distribute it ourselves, the overseas box office sales may only be 60% or even lower than when the 7 major distributors released it. However, I've talked to you before. Although we'll earn less, we can use this to open up channels and form a distribution network overseas. If we follow Michael Eisner's suggestion, we may be able to earn more money temporarily, but we'll never be able to form our own distribution network." "Eric, don't you think that the price is a bit high?" "If we want to expand our distribution network, I think we can use low-cost small productions to expand. That way, we won't lose too much money." As for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it's too much of a waste to use it to expand our distribution channels. Eric placed his right hand on the conference table in front of him and pressed it down slightly, as if he was suppressing something in his heart. But very quickly, he sighed softly and continued. "Robert, if a low-cost small production can't sell well, we won't be able to make much money overseas. If we can't make money, those overseas distributors aren't doing charity work. Why would they help to distribute it? It's not like you don't know that most of the Hollywood movies with box office sales below $50 million are basically bought out directly by overseas distributors. Even the 7 major film companies themselves can't be bothered to do global distribution." "Eric." Robert Shaye stared into Eric's eyes and said seriously, "Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is my movie. I hope that it can maximize its profits. I think that Firefly's most important task now is to make money. As long as we have money, I believe that expanding our distribution channels will be a piece of cake." Chapter 310. After Robert Shaye said this, the two of them fell into a short silence. They stared at each other without giving in. After a while, Eric first avoided Robert Shaye's gaze. A victorious smile appeared on Robert Shaye's face. "All right, Robert, if you insist." Eric's voice was slightly hoarse and his tone had become lower. When Robert Shea heard Eric say this, he let out what he thought was a hearty laugh. He stretched out his hand slightly, as if he wanted to pat Eric on the shoulder. However, there was a conference table between the two of them. Robert Shea's action was obviously not going to succeed. Eric, don't be like this. You have to believe me. In Hollywood, money is the most important thing. Without money, everything is just empty talk. Distribution channels can't be built in a day or two. Look at the other film companies now. Which one of them doesn't have decades of history? After Robert Shea finished speaking, Eric nodded slightly. It was unknown whether it was acknowledgement or something else. By the way, Robert, Jeffrey told me that you weren't optimistic about the Basic Instinct project? Robert Shea was stunned for a moment, then nodded. Yes, Eric, I think. Eric was not in the mood to listen to Robert Shea's reason. When he heard Robert Shea say this, he directly said, in that case, cancel this project. Robert Shea opened his mouth. What? Cancel? Cancel? But, hasn't Jeffrey already started casting? I mean, cancel it from the company's production plan this year. Eric looked up. If this movie is produced, there will indeed be a lot of trouble in the rating. So, to avoid risks, I intend to pull in investments from the Big Seven. In addition, I will personally invest a portion and set up a separate shell company to operate it. Robert Shea had been in Hollywood for 20 years. How could he not understand what Eric meant? He was indeed not optimistic about the script of Basic Instinct, but he did not oppose it too firmly. Now, what Eric did was equivalent to taking the production of the movie out of Firefly's hands. Then, if the movie was successful in the future, whether it was the copyright or the income, it would have nothing to do with Firefly. In other words, it would have nothing to do with him. How could Robert Shea not understand that this was Eric's counterattack to his actions just now? He had been willful, just now, and as a major shareholder, Eric had the right to be willful. After a moment of hesitation, Robert Shea said, Eric, although I don't think highly of it, I actually don't object. According to the current plan, we will release Sleeping with the Enemy, that you're in charge of, The Silence of the Lambs from TG Film Company, and part of Ghost during the summer. We will co-distribute them with Disney. I think that Firefly won't have enough resources to distribute Basic Instinct, so it's not a bad choice to do this project alone. It can also avoid risks. Robert Shea pondered for a while before he clenched his teeth. He did not believe that Eric would continue to be successful. Therefore, Robert Shea quickly nodded and said, Okay, Eric, we'll do as you say. In fact, even if Robert Shea did not agree, Eric still planned to do this. In his previous life, the box office of Basic Instinct was only a little over $100 million. Whether it was reputation or box office, it could not be compared to Ghost or The Silence of the Lambs. It might not even be as good as Sleeping with the Enemy. However, since Robert Shea insisted on handing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Disney, Eric had to make a certain response to make Robert Shea hesitate. Otherwise, Eric was certain that Robert Shea would continue to push his luck. Then, I'll go back to work. When Eric heard Robert Shea's response, he nodded, stood up, and left the conference room. After Robert Shea waited for Eric to leave, he smirked and finished the coffee in front of him before he slowly stood up and left. On the Santa Monica Mountain north of Malibu, in a forest, dozens of people were nervously working. There were all kinds of filming equipment everywhere. This was the set of The X-Files. Although the story of The X-Files took place in various states in the United States, it was impossible to travel around during filming. Instead, they shot around Los Angeles or set up a set in a studio. Only when it was unavoidable would they go to the corresponding state to take some outdoor scenes and then edit them. Muller and Scarlett were driving a black Ford sedan on a small road between the trees. Muller and Scarlett were chatting leisurely when the radio in the car suddenly became chaotic amidst a strange buzzing sound. Muller quickly stopped the car. Cut. This scene is over. Raymond, quickly removed the camera from the car. Brad, Fahmy, you guys can rest for a while. Director Kim Monis held a loudspeaker in his hand and shouted to everyone. The crew quickly got busy. Brad Pitt and Famke Janssen also heard the director's words and got out of the car while talking and laughing. Brad Pitt took a bottle of water from the logistics department and politely handed it to Famke Janssen. The girl smiled and thanked him before taking it. "Hey, Famke, it's time to get off work in 2 hours. How about going to the bar tonight?" Brad Pitt saw that the girl was in a good mood and invited her in a timely manner. Famke Janssen hesitated for a moment. Although he had a good impression of Brad Pitt over the past few days, to the point that paparazzi had taken pictures of the two of them and published them in the newspapers when they were strolling together, Brad Pitt didn't have a good impression of him. However, another figure kept flashing through the girl's mind. She knew very well how she got the role of the female lead. Back then, that little man had given the role to her, a newcomer with no acting experience, among a large number of strong competitors. In fact, the meaning was very obvious. He had taken a fancy to her. The girl knew that she had signed the acting contract, which meant that she had tacitly agreed to something. She originally thought that Eric Williams would quickly invite her, but not long after she got the role, Eric Williams was embroiled in a storm, and there was no follow-up. In addition, Brad Pitt tirelessly courted her. Famke Janssen felt that she got along well with this man. Brad Pitt was gentle, considerate, and very good at coaxing women. Famke Janssen slowly began to be moved. Maybe he has already forgotten about me, the girl thought. He hadn't done anything for a few months. In addition, he was obviously a playboy. How could a playboy lack women around him? She might just be an inconspicuous passerby by his side. Beautiful women were inevitably proud. Therefore, these thoughts inevitably made the girl feel a little depressed. She was even more upset than when she had signed the acting contract for the role. "I think, maybe, okay." Famke Janssen thought for a moment and nodded slightly. Brad Pitt's smile became even brighter. "By the way, do you have a bar that you often go to?" Famke Janssen shook her head. "Sorry, I used to live in New York. You can just pick one." "No problem." Pitt nodded. Just as the two of them were about to continue talking, a car drove directly into the set. One of the producers of the X-Files, Hans Whittle, got out of the car and looked around. When he saw the two of them gathered together, he walked over with a slight frown. "Hi, Hans. Why are you here?" Before Hans Whittle walked up to them, director Kim Manners came up to him. Hans Whittle smiled and shook hands with Kim Manners. He pointed at Brad Pitt and Famke Janssen. "I'm looking for them." "What's the matter?" Kim Manners asked. Hans Whittle shrugged helplessly. "Mr. Williams is looking for them." "Mr. Williams?" Kim Manners was stunned, but she quickly reacted. The only person who could be addressed by Hans Whittle in such a manner was Eric Williams. "What's the matter?" Hans Whittle stuffed a newspaper into King Monas's hands. "Read it yourself." At this time, Brad Pitt and Famke Janssen also walked over. When they saw the newspaper that Hans Whittle had stuffed into Kim Manners' hands, they were stunned. It was clearly a photo of the two of them. Brad Pitt knew very well that Hans Whittle was a producer for Firefly. He immediately had a bad feeling. He couldn't be that unlucky, right? He still hadn't forgotten how he had been chased out of a TV set in New York because he had struck up a conversation with the female lead of a TV series. Although he hated Eric very much at the time, as the matter slowly passed, Eric became more and more dazzling, and he became more and more insignificant. A person would be envious and jealous of those who were 1 or 2 steps ahead of them, but for those who were far ahead of them, they usually wouldn't have such feelings. Although Eric was much younger than him, Brad Pitt didn't have much negative feelings towards Eric. Instead, he was more in awe of him. When the set was first established, he was worried that Famke Janssen might be Eric's woman, so he didn't think much of it at first. But as time passed, Brad Pitt realized that Famke Janssen and Eric didn't seem to have any relationship, so he was relieved to pursue her. But now, he realized that he had miscalculated again. Glancing at Famke Janssen beside him, Brad Pitt really wanted to slap himself. This woman had no acting experience before. Who would believe that she was picked out from a large group of auditionees because of luck? Since it wasn't luck, there must be other reasons. And the male and female leads of the X-Files were personally decided by Eric Williams, so this other reason couldn't be more obvious. Kim Manus looked at the newspaper, where Brad Pitt and Famke Janssen were walking side by side, and the article's content was about the love sparks between the male and female leads of the X-Files. He asked curiously, "Hans, what's the meaning of this?" Hans Whittle leaned close to King Manus and whispered a few words into his ear. King Manus looked at the man and woman in front of him and immediately said, "Hans, I think there must be some misunderstanding. I thought this article was for the promotion of the movie." Brad Pitt couldn't hold it in any longer and added, "Mr. Hans, this is really just a misunderstanding. I have absolutely nothing to do with Miss Famke Janssen." When Famke Janssen heard Brad Pitt's words, her eyes widened in surprise as she looked at the man beside her. Brad Pitt looked at the woman who was looking at him with a guilty conscience, but he quickly said, Miss Janssen, we just happened to meet yesterday. After chatting for a while, we parted ways. Nothing happened between us, right?" Famke Janssen finally reacted. She didn't know what had happened to Brad Pitt in New York. Therefore, when she saw the man deny it without hesitation, as if the things he had done to her before were all an illusion, her good impression of him immediately disappeared. "Yes, Mr. Hans. I have nothing to do with Mr. Pitt. The rumors in the newspaper were all made up by the paparazzi," Famke Janssen said coldly. While Pitt felt relieved, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. However, he quickly adjusted his mentality. As long as he could keep his position as the male lead, when he became famous in the future, he could get any woman he wanted. He learned from his agent that Fox attached as much importance to The X-Files as to Friends. Whenever he fantasized about his future as the six-man team in Friends, Brad Pitt felt that his years in Hollywood had not been in vain. Everything he had done was worth it. Hans Whittle glanced at the two of them expressionlessly, then set his eyes on Famke Janssen. He said meaningfully, "Mr. Williams wants to see you. You can say this to him in person." When director Kim Manus saw this, he was both unhappy and unwilling to give up. He asked, "Hans, is it now? Is the next scene ready? Why can't we finish the next scene?" Hans Whittle patted Kim Manus on the shoulder. "I'm sorry, Kim. We might have to stop here today. It will take more than an hour to drive from here to Firefly's headquarters. Mr. Williams told me to take them there before I get off work." Although Kim Manus was a little helpless, seeing Hans Whittle's unquestionable gaze, he had no choice but to compromise. He said, "All right, I'll let the crew shoot the other scenes first." Chapter 3:11. Brad Pitt and Famke Janssen got into Hans Whittle's car together. Although they sat in the back, both of them leaned against the door as if they didn't want to have any contact with each other. "Mr. Hans, may I use your mobile phone?" Pitt thought for a moment and felt that it was better to inform his agent about this matter. Hans Whittle handed over the large brick beside him. Pitt thanked him, then called his agent, Sherisa Cody. He explained the matter in front of Famke Janssen and Hans Whittle before hanging up. Seeing the undisguised contempt on Famke Janssen's face, Pitt really wanted to curse to her face. "What right does a B*TCH like you who relied on men have to look down on me?" More than an hour later, the three of them arrived at Firefly's headquarters. Brad Pitt's agent, Sherisa Cody, was already waiting outside. Hans Whittle said something to the receptionist, then led the three of them upstairs to Eric's office. "Mr. Williams is currently auditioning actors. You'll have to wait for a while. I have something to do, so I'll head back first." As Hans Whittle spoke, he gave instructions to the secretary who served them coffee and quickly left. Eric only instructed Brad Pitt and Famke Janssen to meet him. Hans Whittle wasn't willing to listen in on such matters. After Hans Whittle and the secretary left, Sherisa Cody and Brad Pitt, who were sitting on a large sofa, whispered to each other before looking at Famke Janssen. "Miss Janssen, can you do me a favor?" Famke Janssen was originally flipping through a magazine on the coffee table in boredom. She wasn't as worried as Pitt. After all, Compared to Brad Pitt, who had been in Hollywood for 7 or 8 years, she was still a newcomer. No matter what profession they were in, before encountering countless setbacks, newcomers would always feel that they definitely had many, many opportunities. If they failed, they would just have to start all over again. Upon hearing Sherisa Cody's words, Famke Janssen looked up and looked at the petite but elegant woman, but he didn't say a word. "It's like this, Miss Johnson. You and Brad really have nothing to do with each other, right?" "Then wait a moment, can you?" "Don't worry. We have nothing to do with each other to begin with. You don't have to worry about me spouting nonsense," Famke Janssen said coldly before lowering his head. Sherisa Cody was a little embarrassed, but she continued to explain, "Miss Johnson, Brad isn't like you. It wasn't easy for him to get the opportunity to be the male lead this time." The woman tightened her grip on the magazine but didn't say anything. Everyone fell silent. "Thank you for your audition, Mr. Brosnan. We'll let you know the results as soon as possible," the assistant said to a handsome man in his 30s in a spacious audition room. After the man left, the 2 assistant directors beside Eric came over and asked, "Mr. Williams, how did it go?" "Still no good." Eric shook his head and crossed out Pierce Brosnan's name. This 007 actor had left a deep impression on him. After all, he had acted in 4 007 movies in a row, and they were all very late. It was impossible not to remember him. Although the actor's acting skills were good and his image was very suitable for a bank manager, Eric couldn't associate him with Sam, the male lead of Ghost. "If that's the case, our audition today will be for naught," one of the assistant directors complained with a smile. "No rush, take your time." Eric closed the folder in front of him and instructed his assistant to put it away for him. Then, he said to everyone, "Let's continue tomorrow. I still have some things to do, so I'll leave first." After leaving the audition room, Eric took the elevator to his office. He pushed the door open and saw 3 people sitting in his office in 2 distinct groups. When they saw him come in, the 3 people in the office quickly stood up and greeted him. "It's okay, have a seat." Eric waved his hand. When he saw Sherisa Cody, he smiled and said, "Miss Cody, why are you here?" Sherisa Cody smiled and said, "I happen to be free." Eric nodded and walked to his desk. He took out a newspaper and sat down on another sofa in the lounge area. He spread the newspaper on the coffee table in front of him. "It's like this, As soon as Eric opened his mouth, Brad Pitt anxiously blurted out again, "Mr. Williams, this is really a misunderstanding. I have nothing to do with Miss Johnson." Eric frowned slightly. "What?" "It's like this, Mr. Williams." Although Sherisa Cody blamed Brad Pitt for losing his cool, she still answered Eric's question and said, "Yesterday, when The X-Files was filming in Santa Monica, Brad and Ms. Johnson happened to arrive at the filming location together. After parking the car, the 2 of them walked to the set together. This photo was secretly taken by the paparazzi at that time. It's actually a misunderstanding. They have nothing to do with each other." Eric looked at Brad Pitt and Sherisa Cody, who were eager to clarify, then turned to Famke Janssen. When the girl saw Eric looking at her, she nodded reluctantly and said, "Yes, I have nothing to do with Mr. Pitt. It's just a coincidence." Eric closed the newspaper, shrugged and said, "Well, it seems like there's no need to continue the discussion. Ms. Cody, Mr. Pitt, you can leave now." Brad Pitt and Sherisa Cody were delighted, knowing that Eric didn't plan on pursuing the matter. After thanking him, they quickly pushed open the door and left. After the 2 left, Eric walked to the coffee machine and poured 2 more cups of coffee. He returned to the sofa and handed a cup to Famke Janssen. The girl took a sip and looked up to quickly glance at Eric before saying softly, "What are you going to do with me?" "What?" Eric was exhausted from the day and had just leaned back on the sofa, so he didn't hear the girl's voice clearly. "Humph." Famke Janssen snorted with a hint of desperation. "I mean, what are you going to do with me? Did something happen to you?" Eric asked curiously when he heard the dispirited tone in the girl's voice. "It's all your fault, bastard." The girl mumbled, but she didn't say the last word. Eric smiled, squinted his eyes, and exhaled as he leaned back on the sofa. "Can you help me rub my temples? It's been a tiring day, and my head hurts a little." Moments later, a pair of cold, slender fingers gently pressed down. Eric's nose was filled with a fragrance that was different from other women's. It was faint and very pleasant. "If I were to say that I saw the news in the newspaper this morning and only called you here to tell you to keep a low profile, you definitely wouldn't believe me, right?" Eric suddenly said after a while. The fingers that were moving paused for a moment before they quickly began rubbing again. "Heh, you definitely wouldn't believe it. Even I don't believe it myself, but it's true." In the settings of this television series, the male and female leads won't be together until the end of the series. They will always maintain an ambiguous relationship, and it's also a way to maintain the ratings. If the two of you are together in real life, then it'll seem fake to maintain an ambiguous relationship in the television series. That's why I want you to keep a low profile and try not to be discovered by the paparazzi. The girl still didn't say anything, but the fingers that were massaging Eric became much gentler. Eric continued, as if he was muttering to himself. "This morning, I almost quarreled with my partner. He felt that he didn't get enough, so he wanted more. He always wants more. Humans are greedy, and that's nothing. However, if he wants more, then he has to show the corresponding strength. How can he have that strength? Jenny left me some time ago. She was my first woman. She chose to leave because of that storm, those stupid things. Actually, it wasn't wrong, but I always wanted to get her back. Even if I had to build an ancient castle on the edge of a cliff like the villain in the story, lock her inside, and raise her like a princess. My princess alone. I built a house by the sea. I wanted to face the sea and let the spring flowers bloom. Then, one by one, they all left. In the end, I found that I was the only one facing the sea. The house was too big, and it was very empty. I wanted too much, but I couldn't catch any of them. In the end, they all ran away. I couldn't be bothered to catch them. They always ran away anyway. Originally, I was really interested in you. Your legs are very long, and I like long-legged beauties. That's because you're too soft-hearted." For some reason, the girl couldn't help but interject even though she blushed slightly when she heard the latter half of Eric's sentence. Eric was stunned for a moment, then he smiled. "Yes, I'm too soft-hearted. A bunch of little girls. They all need to be taught a lesson." The girl choked. "Okay. I take back what I just said." Eric grabbed one of the girl's small hands and pulled Famke Jensen into his arms. The girl obediently let the man do as he pleased, gently pressing her face against Eric's body. "Have you seen Smell a Woman?" "I wrote that script." After hesitating for a moment, the girl still denied it. "I haven't seen it. I'll find time to watch it. Actually, I can distinguish the body fragrance of every woman I've been intimate with. Now, I've remembered yours." The girl mocked, "That doesn't sound like a good thing, right?" "It does seem like it's a bad thing." Eric laughed self-deprecatingly. "How can it be a good thing that I've taken a liking to? It's very difficult for them to escape." Look, since it's already like this, don't run away." "I still have to try. Who knows, I might be able to escape." "I won't be satisfied if I don't try. Besides, what kind of man wants to possess so many women? At least, it's not possible in this day and age, right?" "No, you're wrong. It's completely possible," Eric said. The two chatted endlessly. Unknowingly, time slowly floated by, and Eric fell asleep with the woman in his arms. When he woke up again, it was completely dark outside. He was covered with a woman's jacket. Eric put the jacket aside and stretched. Feeling a light behind him, Eric turned around and saw Famke Jensen sitting behind his desk, quietly reading a magazine with his head lowered. Noticing the movement in front of her, the girl looked up. "You're awake?" "Yeah." Eric stood up and stretched his neck that was a little uncomfortable from sleeping on the sofa. He asked, "What time is it?" The girl looked at her watch against the desk lamp. 7:20. You've only slept for 2 hours. The company's security knocked on the door just now. I told them that you had something to do, so they left. Oh, why didn't you leave? Eric asked casually. The girl raised her beautiful eyebrows. Do you want me to go back? Okay, pretend I didn't ask. Eric shrugged. Then, do you have any plans for tonight? If you didn't call us over, I would have already agreed to go clubbing with Brad Pitt tonight. If it was good, maybe something would have happened. But it's definitely impossible now. So, if there's nothing else, maybe I'll go home, wash up, and sleep. When I wake up tomorrow, I'll dress up nicely for the shoot. You didn't have a boyfriend before? Eric asked curiously. Please, I'm already 25 years old. How can I not have a boyfriend? The girl said helplessly. He's a photographer, but when we came to Los Angeles, we broke up. Oh. Eric nodded and continued. Then, what's next? The girl blinked quickly a few times. Seeing the smile on Eric's face turn evil, she had an inexplicable expectation in her heart. What do you think? Eric thought for a moment, then walked around the desk to the girl and said, Then, maybe we can. Seeing Eric's actions, Famke Jensen thought that the man wanted to do something here, and his neck shrunk reflexively. But the girl clearly misunderstood Eric's intentions. The man came to her side, pulled out a small drawer behind the desk, and took out a stack of things. It looked like they were invitations. Then let's go to the party. I often get invitations, but I've never been. These were all sent by my assistant. Let me see if there's anything for today. Seeing Eric looking down at the invitations one by one, the girl relaxed in disappointment and said, But, the clothes I'm wearing aren't suitable for a party, right? Eric looked up. The girl was wearing a light gray shirt, loose trousers, and shiny leather boots that looked like men's. The last time I saw you, you weren't wearing these, right? These are costumes, okay? Big boss, you gave the order, and we didn't even have time to change before we were dragged here, the girl complained unhappily. Oh, I remember now. I think the set photos were like this. Okay, it's my fault for calling you here in such a hurry. I'll give you a dress later, Eric said casually as he lowered his head and continued searching. The girl opened her mouth, wanting to refuse, but in the end, she didn't say anything. After all, this man wasn't short on money. By the way, where are the parties held? I live in Burbank now. It's too late, I'm afraid. The girl's voice became softer as she spoke. She probably couldn't escape tonight. She didn't seem to want to escape either, or she would have left earlier. Beverly Hills. It's usually there. You know, most of the celebrities live there, Eric said. He finally found one. How about this? It's from Coppola's house. It happens to be tonight. Francis Coppola? Eric nodded. Yes, the one who filmed the Godfather series. I'm also curious as to why I received an invitation from them. Oh, I think Alan specifically reminded me this morning, but I didn't take it to heart. I've never been to such an invitation before. So, I'm the first one. The girl raised her eyebrows. Eric smiled. Yes, you're the first one. Chapter 312. In a brightly lit manor in Beverly Hills, a party to celebrate the opening of The Godfather 3 was being held. Beside the swimming pool outside the villa, a middle-aged man in his 40s, who was slightly bald, was gesticulating to the black-haired girl beside him. Back then, I served as Mr. Coppola's assistant for 2 consecutive productions of The Godfather. My position was equivalent to that of an assistant director. You know, I was only in my early 30s at that time. It's not easy to become an assistant director at the age of 30 in Hollywood. In the following years, I kept in touch with Mr. Coppola. Mr. Coppola introduced me as an investor for this movie. He was very optimistic about my script. So, Miss Connolly, as long as you can act well, I promise you that this time, you will make a successful transition. Although Jennifer Connelly was a little impatient, she didn't dare to show it. Ever since she lost the role of the encounter girl in Dark War last year, her agent, Jim Lester, no longer focused on her. Because of this, she hadn't gotten any roles for a year. If this continued, she might be completely forgotten by Hollywood. Every time she thought of this possibility, she felt a strong sense of uneasiness. What else could she do after leaving Hollywood? She knew nothing except acting. She would find a man to marry and be a full-time housewife. Although she could accept this choice, she didn't want to live a boring life of caring about daily necessities. Even if she got married, she wanted to live a little more affluent. But among the people she knew, only people in their 40s or 50s who could give her such a life were people with certain qualifications and status in Hollywood. Not to mention that these people were usually the same age as her father, but in Hollywood, these people's marriages were the most unreliable. She might be dumped at any time. At that time, she would be old and no longer beautiful. What would she do? "Hey, Miss Connolly, are you listening to me?" She was just distracted for a moment, but soon heard a slightly unhappy voice in her ear. She quickly pulled herself together and smiled. "Sorry, Mr. Brandt." Tony Brandt was very satisfied with the girl's attitude and said, "Miss Connolly, it's very rude to be absent-minded on such a grand occasion. Those big shots won't be as generous as me. Oh, Mr. Coppola is here. And Al Pacino, that seems to be his nephew, Nicolas Cage." Jennifer Connelly also saw a few people walking out of the villa, talking and laughing. The bearded man with glasses in the middle was obviously Francis Coppola. The people who were chatting in the courtyard all gathered to greet each other. "Miss Connelly, let's go up and say hello," Tony Brandt said, raising his arm slightly. Jennifer Connelly hesitated for a moment, but still took the man's arm and walked towards Francis Coppola and the others. After arriving near Francis Coppola and waiting for the previous group of people to leave, Tony Brandt hurriedly let go of Jennifer Connelly and walked towards Coppola and the others with a fawning smile. "Mr. Coppola, congratulations on being able to direct the finale of the Godfather series. I believe this movie will definitely cause a sensation again." "Thank you, Tony. How's your movie going?" Francis Coppola shook hands with Tony Brandt and asked casually. "It's almost ready to start shooting." "Oh, this is the female lead I chose, Miss Jennifer Connelly. She starred in Mr. Sergio Lionel's Once Upon a Time in America. That little girl, Deborah, I don't know if you still remember her." Francis Coppola looked Jennifer Connelly up and down as if he was examining an object. For Hollywood moguls like them, no beautiful woman could amaze them. Being sized up by such a gaze, the girl, who had wanted to greet Francis Coppola, immediately felt reserved and uneasy. Her right hand, which she had been about to raise, gently drooped down as she clutched the hem of her gown. "Well, not bad, but she's a little too beautiful. Tony, your movie is a drama. It's not a good thing for the female lead to be too beautiful." Tony Brandt was about to speak when Francis Coppola waved his hand and said, "Of course, that's a movie you've been preparing for a long time, so it's your business how you choose the female lead. I won't interfere." No, Mr. Coppola, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't know where I got the investment from. Moreover, your vision is much better than mine. If you think it's not suitable, I'll definitely consider it carefully." Hearing Tony Brandt's words, the girl opened her mouth slightly and looked at Francis Coppola. Her fingers that were pinching the hem of her dress were trembling because of the force. She felt even more wronged. The role that she had fought so hard for was going to be ruined because of these people's casual words. For a moment, she wished that these big shots would be dragged to hell. Francis Coppola happened to see Connelly's expression. Coppola quickly patted Tony Brandt on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't be like this, Tony. I was just saying. This little girl is still not bad. If you replace her, I don't know how many times she'll curse me secretly." "How is that possible? Miss Connelly admires you very much." "We were just talking about your movie," Tony Brandt hurriedly said as he gently nudged the girl standing beside him. Jennifer Connelly held back her sniffling. Just as she was about to perk up and say something, Francis Coppola had already led Al Pacino and Nicolas Cage to somewhere else. "Frank, who was that person just now? I think I've seen him somewhere before," Al Pacino asked after the three of them walked away. Francis Coppola said casually, "When we were shooting the first two parts of The Godfather, he was my assistant. That's why you have an impression of him. We've had occasional contact over the years. Some time ago, he planned to shoot a movie himself and came to me for help. I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I introduced him to a few investors." Al Pacino thought for a moment, but he still couldn't remember Tony Lambert, so he threw him to the back of his mind. Seeing that Nicolas Cage, who was standing on the other side of Francis Coppola, was still looking at the door, Al Pacino smiled and said, "Well, Nick, I've already said that Eric rarely attends parties. He doesn't like this kind of occasion. You'd better prepare for the audition. As long as your performance can satisfy Eric, and you're a child of the Coppola family, I believe that Eric will definitely give you the male lead in Ghost." Hearing Al Pacino suddenly mention Eric, Francis Coppola also looked emotional. Speaking of which, a lot of people thought that the little guy wouldn't be able to survive the storm some time ago. Who would have thought that in the end, not only did he come out unscathed, but he also made Michael Eisner suffer a loss and gave him a script. Al, you've worked with Eric Williams before. What kind of person do you think he is? Al Pacino thought for a moment and shook his head gently. I can't say. At the end of the year before last, I had just returned to acting in a play on Broadway, and Eric came to me. We were in a coffee shop, and he told me about his script. I didn't find anything special about it and wanted to refuse, but then the little guy confidently told me about the script for Smelling Women. Then I found that I was moved, and soon I came to Los Angeles with him. If I have to say, he is very mature, far more mature than his peers. When you get along with him, you quickly forget that you're talking to a young man who's not even 20 years old. Instead, it's like you're talking to your peers. Now that you mention it, I'd like to meet this miraculous young man, Francis Coppola said with a smile. It seems that Steven contacted him and wanted to get the adaptation rights for Jurassic Park, but the little guy rejected him. Haha, in Hollywood, there aren't many people who can make Steven suffer. He definitely has that right now, Al Pacino said with a smile. Francis Coppola was stunned for a moment, then laughed. Yes, he does have that right. Maybe in a few years, the Big 7 in Hollywood will become the Big 8. I really don't know how he created so many blockbuster movies. Last year, half of the top 10 box office hits were produced by Firefly. It's really amazing. As the three of them were talking, they saw that there seemed to be a commotion at the entrance of the manor. They looked at each other and walked in that direction in unison, wanting to see what was going on. Famek, why do you look a little uneasy? Is the dress not fitting? As they drove to the Coppola manor, Eric glanced at Famek Jensen, who was sitting in the passenger seat, and asked curiously. At this time, the girl was wearing a rose-colored one-shoulder corset evening gown. Her hair was also tied up in a bun. Although she had only put on a simple layer of makeup, she was still many times more beautiful than when Eric saw her in the afternoon. No, nothing. It's just a professional habit, Famek Jensen said embarrassedly, his hands finally relaxing on his knees. A professional habit? Eric was even more curious. Yes. The girl smiled awkwardly and explained, in the past, when I attended fashion shows, the clothes I wore were all made by the designers. If I accidentally tore them, us small models can't afford to pay for them. So, after the runway, I couldn't wait to take them off immediately. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.